You're live.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Brookline School Committee meeting. It's February 3rd, 2022, and we would like to wish Happy Lunar New Year to all our community people out there who celebrate. So Happy New Year to you. And we are going to start. So first item is a consent agenda. It's for January 20th, 2022. Do I have a motion? Thank you, Stephen. Do I have a second to that? Thank you, David. And we'll just take a vote. This is all we have on our consent agenda tonight. So David?
Yes.
Stephen?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
Is Helen here? Not seeing Helen. Val?
Yes.
Mariah?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Who am I missing? I vote yes as well.
Jen?
Oh, Jennifer, that's who I'm missing. Thank you, Stephen. I would guess Jennifer's coming. I haven't heard otherwise. Okay, we will move on to a student report. Claire, it's yours. Welcome.
Awesome. Hi there, my name is Claire Gallion, and I am the student representative on school committee. Brookline High School recently had its mid-year exams after much debate. The mid-year exams this year were much different from past years, with blocks being 90 minutes for all students, tests weighing less in students' overall grades, and tests being limited to 45 to 60 minutes. In addition, tests were more spread out than in past years, with the maximum amount of tests a student would take in a day being 2, though many students had to take 3 on one of their days. For tonight's report, I'd like to do a reflection on the student experience with midterms and whether or not they were a beneficial experience. I sent out a survey this week and received 81 responses from students, with a pretty even divide between the grades. My first question was asking students to rank how stressful the experience of preparing for midterms was on a period from from 1 to 10. 69% of students ranked the experience as 6 out of 10 or higher. Though midterm exams were pushed back a couple of days due to having a couple of days off, many students felt rushed in the process of studying for midterms. Midterms were earlier in the month than they have been in past years, and for many students, they felt they had very little time to review before their exams. When I asked how many classes did you have to prepare for your exams on average, 68.8% of students reported having between 0 and 2 classes of preparation before their exams. The supposed benefit of having mid-year exams was to help students develop study skills for preparing for multiple cumulative exams, but many students didn't feel they had the time to prep. For many students, the motivations for having mid-year exams became cloudy because so many of their exams were not cumulative. I asked students how many of their exams were cumulative, and 31.6% of students said they had 1 cumulative exam, 40.8% said they had 2. In combination, 72.4% of students had 1 or 2 cumulative exams. If the purpose of having midterms is to practice preparing for multiple cumulative exams at once, why were so few cumulative? I know I personally only had 1. Though the purposes of these exams became a little unclear, I still wanted to investigate how effective they were in making students feel confident in their study skills. I asked, how much do you agree with this statement? These midterm exams were beneficial to my developing study skills. 31.3% said they agreed or strongly agreed. 26.6% were neutral, and 42.6% said disagreed or strongly disagreed. I think it's important to acknowledge that 31.3% of students found this beneficial, but at the same time, 68.8% of students could not agree with this statement. This raises the question of how the school can support students in the future with preparing for these exams and learning how to study effectively. The only students in the building who have taken cumulative exams before this year are the juniors and the seniors, and even for us, it has been 2 years. If the purpose of these exams was really to help us students learn how to prepare for exams, why wasn't there more support for us? It makes sense to expose us to this sort of assessment before we leave for college, but is giving us 0 to 2 classes of preparation really enough time to make us ready for college level examination? I next asked students to rank how important they believed mid-year exams to be on a scale of 1 to 10. Over half of the students ranked it a 6 out of 10 or higher. It's interesting to see, while many students said the process was stressful or that they didn't have much time to prepare, they still left these exams feeling like they were important. I agree that they are important, but this information leads us to think about how we can handle these important exams in the future. How can we create structure for students to thrive and learn through their experience taking these tests rather than rushing through a stressful process? I also asked students what they thought about the midterm schedule because it seemed to be popular opinion that it's the best part of taking exams. I asked them to rank how much they enjoyed the schedule, and 93.9% ranked it a 6 out of 10 or higher. The schedule was definitely a success for the large majority of students. For the final section of my report this evening, I would like to provide you all with some direct comments from students. One sophomore said, "I feel as though midterm exams can't always fairly show all of our strengths as a student." A junior wrote, "Midterms were definitely useful for reminding me of what I've learned this year, especially in my Spanish class. Studying old topics make them feel a lot fresher in my mind. However, I will say that having these cumulative tests altogether was pretty stressful, and I might have benefited from some guidance on how to study for certain subjects / how to space out my time so that not all of the review happened in the last few days before the test. A lot of us haven't taken cumulative exams in 2+ years or ever, and I know that we could use some tips or extra help just for how to effectively study. Though I will say that this mid-year testing session helped me figure out for myself what works for me best in terms of studying methods." Another sophomore wrote, "As a student with learning disabilities, I think the school did a very poor job making these tests more accessible to me and other students." Lastly, a junior wrote, "I think since midterms were so relaxed, they were actually counterintuitive since studying for them was not as big of a deal. In my opinion, if you have something which is made to help you learn study skills, it should make studying feel vital. I would rather not study than study badly, since that reinforces bad study habits. The exams felt generally useless academically. Personally, though, I would still rather do exams than normal school." Overall, the midterm exams were a stressful but important experience for many students. Every student has been hit academically by the pandemic, and that leaves many of us without needed skills. As we go forward and continue to have important cumulative exams, we have to keep in mind how students can be better supported and prepared for the exams they're stressed about. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Exams are tough, that's for sure. What comments do people have or questions they have for Claire? Stephen.
Thanks, Claire. I'm interested in learning more, if you know, about the experience of that student with special needs. You didn't have the chance to disaggregate the data based on whether students had special needs, did you? And can you give any insight as to whether, well, I guess, can you give a non-data driven anecdotal insight as to whether you think that experience is generalizable, as to whether it represents any substantial segment of the population of BHS kids with special needs?
So I didn't ask any questions in my survey about whether or not students had special needs or had accommodations, but something I did hear from my friends who have accommodations that was sort of a frustration was that the test blocks were 90 minutes for all students. And so students who in their IEPs had the accommodation that they got extra time weren't getting extra time because they were getting the same time as everyone else, because everyone was getting extra time. And so while that sort of serves everyone, I think some students who had those accommodations felt sort of cheated because the extra help that they were getting was benefiting students without those accommodations even more.
Thanks, Claire. Did the midterms expand to take up a longer chunk of time? I mean, was it intended as an accommodation for all students since they were unused to taking exams, since it's been a couple of years since we've been in schools? Or was it the usual midterm exams?
I think it was the usual midterm exam length, but our tests were shorter. So the test was supposed to be 45 to 60 minutes, even though in past years it was longer.
Thanks, Claire.
Yeah.
Any other comments, questions, thoughts? Claire, I just have one. Are some of your courses just semester courses, so it was actually the end of the term test, or that's not the case?
For me, for my semester long courses, they're both in SWS, so I had projects instead of exams for them. Okay. But some people had like cumulative exams for their semester long courses.
Because that would be the final for that. I mean, the course is done. They're going to take the next course, right? Yeah.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And did you have a sense of were other courses also offering alternative assessments like projects as SWS did, or no? Do you know?
I think some did. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it was definitely a mix for most students. But I think it was largely test driven, especially with AP classes.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Claire. Okay, you're welcome to stay as long as you want, as you know, and you're welcome to leave when you want to get on with your evening. Yeah. Okay, Dr. Guillory, we're turning it over to you for the superintendent's report.
All righty, good evening. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. We are going to dive right in. So certainly we're going to continue with our pattern of sharing with you some of the most recent school visits, some community engagement activities, elements of our district themes in action, and then to share our spotlight on excellence for tonight. So in my most recent school visits, I visited Lincoln Heath, BHS, Beep, Putterham. We actually didn't make it over to Lynch this time, and Pierce today. And I have Lawrence actually tomorrow. So at this point in the year, I'm checking in with principals on the status of their goals. How are they working towards their school improvement plan goals, as well as how teacher evaluations and staff evaluations are going for them at this moment. And principals or building leaders are reporting great progress in all of those areas. On Monday, I did get a chance to visit all of the Cade schools just to check in on how they were doing after the weekend storm. As Suzanne shared, Happy Lunar New Year to all. So this is a collection of some of the images or work that was happening around the district, celebrating or acknowledging Lunar New Year on February 1st. So the first image that we have there is Principal Lewis posing with decor there around the front office of Baker. Miss Baran's class at Ridley shared some Tiger bookmarks that they made. And then there's a first grade classroom, Miss Sontag's class, showing some Korean clothing that's worn during Lunar New Year. So again, lots of celebrations were happening. This is a small sampling of what was taking place in and around the district. The opening of 22 Tappan occurred. We've certainly been sharing that information out. And again, a small collection of some of the photos that we captured during the clap-in service, as well as a visit over to the building. I can't tell you the number of accolades and praises, both from staffs and students about the building. You can see the third image there, the students enjoying some of the common spaces there. But I had the pleasure of the day before when they were serving lunch to the students over there, of holding the door and just listening to the students as they were coming in. And it was a flood into the building, and it was students immediately gravitated out to every aspect of the building, exploring, some going all the way up to the top floor to enjoy some of the viewpoints and staking out sort of their spots in the building. So it was very nice. And the students are just so appreciative. And one of the intentional design aspects of the building is certainly the use of windows to bring in the natural light. And that was one of their big, it's just bright, it's nice, it's bright, it's clean. So kudos to, again, the Brookline community for all of your hard work and support around ensuring timely opening of this facility. As far as community engagement, Wednesday evening, I had the opportunity to join the Ridley School students and families at their weekly FRR Readers and Leaders Zoom event. The school was is in the midst of celebrating Florida Ruffin Ridley's 160th birthday. And the Equity PAC there asked me to be the guest speaker or reader that evening. After reading Hidden Figures and sharing stories and photos from my working days at NASA, I enjoyed questions from an enthusiastic and inquisitive group of students. Even had a few adults that got in with some questions there. So it was truly a wonderful evening and a fitting tribute to the school's namesake. Last night, Director of Human Resources Ty Fluker joined me in meeting with Pierce parents and guardians last night as part of the principal search process. As you know, Ms. Jamie Yadoff is presently serving as the interim principal. On January 24th, we launched the search process to name a permanent principal for the school. Last night's meeting was an opportunity for parents and guardians to offer their feedback about the leadership qualities they are looking for in their next leader. We'll be meeting with the Pierce faculty next week, Tuesday, to solicit their input. And there's also a survey available for Pierce constituents. Parent meetings, I've almost completed my parent entry meetings at each of the schools. On Wednesday, January 19th, I met with the BHS PTO Executive Committee. Friday, January 21st, I met with the Baker PTO. On Thursday evening, January 27th, I met with parents of the English Learner PAC. And then next week will be the final meeting with Heath School PTO. And then again, this week I had my monthly district-wide parent leaders meeting. And with that, we have some recruiting events going on. I think Janae shared this opportunity a while back. It was supposed to coincide with January 6th date, but it had to be moved because of the surge in the virus. So the BEAD recruiting event will take place next Wednesday, February 9th for our educators of color. So all that can and are able, please connect with Janae Utaro about this opportunity in RSVP. And this week's Spotlight on Excellence, we turn our spotlight on some timely and important work being led by our educators in the Brookline Early Education Program. The BEAT Pyramid Model leadership team is here this evening to talk a little bit about the social emotional learning work they are leading and the impact it is having on our youngest learners. The work is of enormous importance across the district, and we regain our footing from the disruptions caused by COVID. We're very grateful to the BEAT team for their efforts, and I'd like to turn the Zoom microphone over to BEAT Principal, Dr. Regina Watts, who will introduce the members of her team so that they can share more information about this important work. Dr. Watts.
Thank you, Dr. Guillory. And it was really a pleasure to have you at BEAP at Putterham on Monday. I saw that picture, fun. It is with great gratitude and pleasure I introduce 5 exceptional educators who are leading the BEAP social emotional team. Those leaders include Michelle Greeley, longtime inclusive pre-K teacher, Dana Diogenes, who is a board certified behavioral analysis. And mind you, as I said to her, I so appreciate a BCBA using multiple lenses to understand children's development. Donna Liebensberger, our fabulous social worker, and the 2 early childhood coordinators, Margaret Eberhardt and Erin Herney. These 5 educators have led the charge and provided leadership to all of our staff on training, modeling, and supporting them to implement social emotional learning in our classrooms. I also just want to recognize we have a DESE consultant who comes in and supports our team and has observed in our classrooms, Margaret Olam. And she's also provided training to our staff at staff meetings, and to Matt Dubois, who's really supported the BEEP team in implementing Second Step. We're not going to spend a lot of time reviewing the curriculum, but I just wanted to provide a quick overview, and the team members will each present one aspect of the social emotional learning. And then at the end, we have about 15 or 20 slides. We're not going to talk because I think we often it's hard for people to understand what social emotional learning looks like in the pre-K years. So we've tried to make it concrete for you, or explicit, so that you can actually see the types of activities and the instructional materials that our creative BEEP staff provides to our students. So BEEP was awarded a DESE Pyramid Model Grant. It's a multi-year grant, and it covered training, books and materials, and direct coaching. So you say, what is the pyramid model? It's a conceptual framework, which we were charged with filling in with different curriculum, evidence-based curriculum practices. And these would support social emotional learning and development. Michelle?
Yep. Hi. Hear me now? Yes.
Yes.
My name is Michelle Greeley, and I'm an inclusive pre-K teacher in BEEP. It is such a joy for all of us in BEEP to be able to integrate social emotional learning into our school days every day. The foundation of the pyramid model is to provide positive supporting relationships. In BEEP, we engage with children all the time when we teach them how to positively interact with one another. For example, we might explicitly teach children how to greet everybody and how to welcome peers. In the classroom, you see it. You might see it in the hall as children are arriving from all the different classrooms at our sites. We practice with puppets, we role play, we sing greeting songs. I think the best part of our jobs too is seeing the children as they use the skills that we teach them, and they use it just spontaneously. For example, I had just announced to the class that we would be having a new student join. And right away, my kids perked right up, and one child said, oh, maybe we could move some of our chairs, and then that child could have some space right here. Another child said, you can put her right here next to me because she just looks so pretty to me. I love that the word model is in our pyramid model framework. As teachers, we model in our words, we model in our actions. Children always need to see their teachers as the human beings that we all are. Teachers have emotions, we encounter problems, we need help, and we can't always do it alone, that's for sure. And we've learned a lot of that this pandemic. Everyday spills, lack of supplies, lost items, staff absences, those are all opportunities that we take to help children to see that their teachers can handle these problems. We demonstrate essential coping for the children all the time. Students watch us as we take our deep breaths, we state our feelings, we model asking for help, we show how we solve problems, and we model the steps to problem solving. They see us helping each other, and this leads to the children helping each other too. In my classroom, we did an entire unit on helping. It was one of my favorite units that I taught. In BEEP, we always look at our curriculum and we identify the most important goal for each child. Within our help curriculum, one child might be learning how to help others. Another child might be learning to use a visual to ask for help. Another child might be learning to self-advocate and say, please don't help me. I can do this all by myself. Our ultimate goal is always to help bring our curriculum into the homes and also into the community. My classroom is located in the Temple Emeth building. You can imagine my surprise when one day we were in our shared temple space and a group of movers came in to move a staging area that was set up for some wedding or function like that. And without any teacher prompting at all, my entire class stopped what they were doing, all the fun that they were having in that shared space. They gathered in front of the stage and they began singing one of our help songs. They sang that song until the movers were completely done their task. It was just such a proud moment that I had, and I wanted to share that with all of you. In BEEP, we celebrate our differences and we intentionally read books that highlight diversity, inclusion, conflicts, emotions, problem solving, and self-identity. We integrate math, science, literacy, and all of those wonderful things into our social emotional lessons. The most powerful reinforcement for children is always praise. As teachers, we never underestimate the power of our words. It's so important that we always strive to find words that help children feel loved, special, appreciated, valued, and respected. I just wanted to thank all of you for appreciating us and for inviting us here tonight to the school committee meeting. Thank you to all the school committee members. Thank you to Dr. Guillory. Thank you, everybody.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dana DeAngelis, and like Regina said, I'm a board certified behavior analyst. Typically, you don't have behavior analysts talking about emotions, so I know this is a little unusual for most people, but for me, it's actually pretty natural because there's so much that drives behavior. So to have this framework to understand kind of everything that goes into a child is incredibly helpful for me as a specialist, and I know it's been helpful for the teachers as well. So just to take a little step back from Michelle, the pyramid model is really similar to tiered interventions like other providers do for academic supports, but really around social emotional learning. If we can provide a ton of social emotional foundational support, the hope is that we'll be able to reduce the need for more intensive intervention. So in some ways, the goal is to make this, make me less important in fewer situations. And a big part of that is really supporting our staff and all of our kiddos who are so much fun. And a big part of our work with the pyramid model was working as a group to create common language. So regardless of which BEEP classroom you were in, which site you were at, you had consistent language that you could use. I know myself and Donna and our coordinators, we go to different sites and you don't always know what you're supposed to say. So we worked really hard to decide these program-wide expectations of be safe, be helpful, be a problem solver, be BEEP. And it's a way for us to, like I said, have common language to support kids across all of our classrooms. So, you kind of know how to say the right thing with the right kiddo. But it's been so much fun to work with this group and really see the impact that it's had on all of our kids because, everyone likes to have a little bud and it's fun to be able to be that for kiddos.
Good evening, everyone. It's nice to be here tonight. Margaret Eberhardt, one of the early childhood program coordinators. Thank you, Michelle and Dana, for the introductions. The base of our pyramid, the tier 1 part of our pyramid is second step. We worked as a group and a committee, and we worked with the district to decide that we would adopt the second step curriculum across all 4 of our 24 classrooms in BEEP. And we have worked this year to slowly roll out the curriculum. It has been a large undertaking, but a very powerful and positive one. And you can see the different components of second step. I would like to emphasize the top of the house here, the engaging families. The engaging of families in the process of supporting the development of social emotional skills at home is a key component of the pyramid model and a key component to the long-term success of social emotional development for young children. Here, we just wanted to share with you some of the visuals, the puppets, the songs, and the different posters that you will find across all of our classrooms that refer to the common language of second step and the different ways that children learn to interact with each other, to identify feelings, and then how to use those strategies to self-regulate and to calm down and to play and take turns. So we look forward in a future meeting and along with Matt to share more about second step and how that's going in the program as well.
Hello, everyone. I'm Donna Liebensberger. I'm a social worker at BEEP. Another one of our tier 1 intervention supports that we use across all of our program is the zones of regulation. And here is an image of the 4 concrete zones. To give you a little bit of background, the zones of regulation is a social emotional framework that teaches students how to regulate their feelings. It helps students build the skills in emotional and sensory regulation. It does this by categorizing the different ways we feel and the states of our alertness into these 4 concrete color zones that you see on the screen. There's blue, green, yellow, and red. And so this framework focuses on teaching students how to recognize and manage the zone they are in, and then how to move in between them. And this slide shows you a sample toolbox of strategies that students can use when they feel like they need to move from one zone to the other. The 4 zones include feelings and state of alertness, and they're very clear. So like the blue zone, you'd be sad or bored. The green zone, you're happy, you're focused. The yellow, you're worried, frustrated, silly. And the red zone is when you're panicked or angry or overjoyed. So the goal is to learn strategies of how to regulate yourself while you're in a zone and moving to another zone. And you'll see ahead in the slides, there are pictures of how the zones of regulation are implemented and utilized across classroom curriculum with student engagement throughout.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Is that okay? Is that working? My name is Erin. I'm one of the BEEP coordinators. And another approach that we used this year was also thinking about staff and effective staffing at school and how that's really part of our pyramid model. In the fall of this year, BEEP staff participated in Playmakers. You'll see the critical components of Playmakers here on the screen. It's a framework based on positive relationships between adults and children. So the overall message for staff was that optimism is a powerful tool. And when we grow our capacity to see and focus on goodness in ourselves and others, our social, emotional, and cognitive processes improve. We did an online training. We did step 1 of the power of optimism. Every staff member participated. Here's one of the artifacts from the training, and loved it, and really was able to tap into feelings about their own learning and how they bring that into the classroom, and how we always need to focus on the positive and optimistic relationship that we have with children.
Great. So for the final part of this, we're going to just show you multiple pictures of materials, activities, and lessons that our teachers are showing. They should be pretty self-explanatory. Go ahead, Betsy. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone. And as I said, I so value the leadership of these 5 exceptional BEEP staff members supporting social emotional learning.
Thank you so much, Regina. My goodness.
You're welcome.
Such a good place to start, get that base going. Do we have comments or questions?
Oh.
Helen, you're early
I'm
childhood.
just felling here. And if you don't know what that word means, I'm just overjoyed. I think it's amazing what you can do with little kids, you know? It blows my mind. And thank you all for all your creativity, for all the hard work that you put into this, because I know it's not easy. But thank you.
Stephen.
Thanks for that. I'm just curious, when did we introduce zones of regulation in PSB? Does anyone know? It's only like a decade old, right?
Yeah, I would say that we have been doing parts of zones for at least 10 years, it feels like. But maybe that's about its inception. I do remember we had one particular occupational therapist who's now retired, Meryl Foreman, who really supported the inclusion of zones gradually over time. So, and the kids just love it. You know, it's almost like red light, green light. And they do enjoy it.
So Brookline was really at the vanguard of adopting this kind of SEL approach. I mean, it would have been one of the first. That's just cool. I didn't know that. Thanks.
It is a great system to work in that creativity is encouraged and people are given some space to try new things. And that is very, very true about Brookline.
I mean, I'd have to say, Regina, I guess I would like it to creep up into our kindergartens and first grades. I know they must be doing something with SEL, but you know, if you could take that same language that we've already started our children with and bring it with them to the primary grades, I would think that would be a great effort.
I'm happy to work with the primary grades on that. And I know that in different schools, different,
Right.
It is implemented to different degrees.
Right.
Yeah, well, one thing that's been interesting, I know that Second Step is implemented at many of the elementary schools, but it's typically implemented by the guidance staff. And as a result, what will happen is a guidance counselor will go into a classroom and they'll go into, like, say, weekly. Second Step at the younger ages is designed to be taught by the teacher every single day. And we've actually had, Margaret and Erin have led, you know, little SEL huddles with our teachers about the challenges of carving out time in the school day, even in pre-K, to really protect that time. And our teachers have focused on that now as the year has gone on more and more, and really understand that's our expectation, that we deliver this curriculum with fidelity.
I actually taught Second Step years and years and years ago, back when I just had black and white pictures. I think they've gone to pictures in color, I think, but Second Step has been around a long time.
It has, you're right.
Yeah, it was good. It's good. Okay, anything, Val?
Regina, I just wanted to say thank you to you and your team. In these 2 years of the pandemic, with our youngest learners in particular, social emotional learning is so critical. And I just want to applaud you for all of the work that you're putting into, you know, really that hands-on approach of how to express emotion. So thank you for all the work.
Yeah, thank you. The credit really goes to the teachers to operationalize this, because it is, I'm a psychologist. I can talk about feelings a lot, but when you're 4 and 5, to be able to use that worry meter and say, oh, is this a big problem or a little problem, and how worried I am, it really makes it concrete for the children. So hands off, they're the most creative bunch of people, and I'm so appreciative of the work they've done. And they've made each other better by meeting in these little groups that we have, these cohorts of SEL. So we're really hoping that we continue that momentum in the years to come.
Linus, I think it's up to you. Do you have a certificate? Are you there?
I'll tell you, it's nothing like real-time multitasking. I'm actually on the phone with DPW as we speak now.
Sorry.
But nevertheless,
Do tell.
here is the certificate for the BEAT team. It reads, the Public Schools of Brookline Spotlight on Excellence is awarded to the Brookline Early Education Program SEL Pyramid Model Team, with gratitude for your leadership in supporting social and emotional learning programs for PSB's youngest learners. And there you are. Congratulations again.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You're welcome to stay as long as you wish at this meeting, or you may go and enjoy your evening as you might like. We're moving to public comment, and we have no one signed up for public comment. And we also have next public hearing on our budget. And I just have a little description here to read. So the public school choice law contained in the Education Reform Act of 1993 presumes that each school committee will admit non-resident students under the school choice program unless there is a vote to the contrary by June 1st of each year. The vote must follow a hearing on the issue of whether or not to participate. So this evening, we are combining the public hearings on the budget and the school choice hearings since the proposed FY23 budget does not include funds for school choice. The school committee plans to vote on the FY23 budget on February 10th, 2022, and intends to vote on the school choice at the first school committee meeting after the election, May 12th, 2022. So the public budget hearing is an opportunity for the public to provide input on the proposed budget. We welcome and we'll be listening to comments. I will tell you that no one has signed up for public comment. Maybe they said everything at the forum on Sunday evening. I don't know, Mariah and Stephen, but no one has signed up tonight. We will have a conversation among ourselves here publicly on the budget. And just to remind people that they can certainly contact us in writing, emails, phone calls, whatever works best for you, if you want to give some input on that. So with that said, we can move into our discussion of the budget, on which we're voting on next week. So Mariah,
Suzanne, can
yep.
I make a little request, actually following up on going back like 3 items in the agenda?
Oh, yeah.
And following up on what Linus said about the DPW, and just wondering if there was any update about the weather for tomorrow. That
Because we can't move on until we know that, right?
I just want to know. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know you do.
Okay. And I just don't want to get too far into the budget and,
Gotcha.
lose that thread.
So where we are, so thank you. So I'm sure some of you have seen the headlines that a number of districts are already closing in advance of the expected weather for tomorrow. So Aaron Galentine and I have been in communication all week about the ever-evolving weather forecast for tomorrow. We haven't made a final determination as of yet. The weather pattern is predicting ice, and that's what's different for this one. It's not actually the snow precipitation, is the flash freezing that may happen right around the morning commute time. She and I are going to continue to communicate a little bit more. She's reaching out to her contact at the National Weather Service, or the service that they use to get a little bit more information, and possibly talking about possibly a Zoom at 3 or 4 in the morning. Like sitting on edge. So unless something changes with the information that she's able to gather, we're just holding as of right now. So there are a number of systems that have closed, certainly Boston Public Schools up north, I think as far as Lynn and Westford, I've seen at this point, out towards Worcester, Hudson, and that area are closing also, or have closed. And then a few of our neighboring superintendents, we've been on a text chain as well, seeing what information they're getting from their departments as well. So that's the information as I presently have it. Yes, ma'am, Mariah.
Is there a cutoff time in the morning at which you will make a go, no go? Just so people know, like if they haven't heard by X time, then that means things are definitely on.
Let's say, if I say it now, Aaron, I'm waiting on Aaron.
So they can't
So
like by 6 a.m. Is it a safe bet that if they haven't heard anything by 6 a.m.?
We can say 6. We can have information guaranteed. So if you will be on unless you hear otherwise. We'll say it that way.
Yep. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, Mariah, does that help you move forward? Oh, thank you. No, I get it. Everybody was thinking the same
There's
thing.
thousands of parents, right? I can't be the only one wondering.
No, everybody was thinking about it. Everybody's thinking about it.
Just from my own knowledge, you don't put out a phone call at 6 in the morning, right? It's just on the TV and radio, correct? Or is there a phone call in the middle?
We have it set for a phone call as well as email as well as news.
But it wouldn't be like at 4 in the morning.
Yes? Well, that's why I said by 6.
Yeah.
I'm assuming it wouldn't show up at 4 in the morning, right? But
yeah. I hope not.
Not at 4.
Some of them have been at like 5:15 in the morning before.
Right,
it's something when every single phone in your house goes off, and it takes a couple minutes for them all to roll through. So you get like 4 calls every minute. For a couple
we need to fix this system.
I mean, Claire, you want to weigh in on this?
Have a crazy radical idea. We could just call it off right now. I mean, if we're worried about like timing.
That's a thought.
That's a thought. It's radical. I'm not sure all the parents would agree, Claire. They have to scramble for daycare for their children, the younger ones. Okay. Well, if we can, let's move to the budget. Would that be okay? Sam or Mariah, are you going to do any quick, this is where we are? Have anything changed from last week?
I think Linus is going to speak.
Oh, Linus, okay.
If I'm correct, yep.
Yep, so let me see if I can find the right one here. That would be it. What can you see?
Yeah.
All right. So this is what we thought we'd do is walk the committee as well as the community as a reminder of the timeline pieces. So starting in December, late November, December is when we get our preliminary budget projection from the town. Then certainly in January, we submitted our preliminary budget. We did that by January 14th with the district needs and requests. Late January, we received notice of the governor's budget, which had some leniency toward education. And then late January, actually last Friday, I think, we received a revised update from the town administrator and deputy town administrator that the initial projection had increased roughly by $800,000. So we are a little bit closer now to 125 million than we were at the start of this process. And so where we are right now is the budget hearing process that Suzanne referenced earlier, with a preliminary vote on our budget request, or the preliminary budget vote, the budget vote on the 10th. And with that, I'll pass the mic over to Mariah. And so with the $130 million budget requests that we made, we recognize the gap that's there, and there's a lot of work to do between now and the end. So I'll pass it over to Mariah to walk us through the remainder of this slide.
Thank you. So, just to take one little step back, the top of the slide is the school committee and PSB process, and the bottom is things that are happening by other entities that affect our budget, just to give a little bit of that flow there too. So as Linus said, we have the budget hearing, and then really the important thing is, if you note where that now line is, we're about a third of the way through this process. We're very early in the process of what's going to go on. As Linus said, there was even a town revision of the amount that they had authorized for us. It's gone from 124 million in December to 124.8 last month. We have coming up ahead of us the updated GIC projections, the revised state budgets. And so there's a lot still that'll be happening there in the February through the rest of this month through the May process. And then our own process at the February Finance Subcommittee meeting, we'll be doing a deep dive like we did last year into the non-personnel portions of the budget. In March, we'll be doing a deep dive into the personnel lines of the budget. I know we'll be hearing from Dr. Guillory and other venues as well about some of the, for example, more detail on the new initiatives, the new starts that he has proposed. And there'll be different meetings. We'll be able to talk about this school committee. We'll have opportunities to discuss at advisory committee, select board. We had a budget forum at on Sunday that was hosted by the Brookline Parent Organization that had about 40 people in attendance, and who we encouraged to come speak to us at the public hearing tonight. So I'm sorry that we didn't get more speakers tonight. On the other hand, hopefully the message is not that tonight is the only public hearing, that there'll be other opportunities for people to be heard as we go through the next 3 months. And then just to remind people again that we, as we discussed at our prior school committee meeting, we will be voting our final budget in May in advance of when town meeting will meet in mid to late May. And then assuming that those two numbers are reconciled at that point, then things are straightforward. If there is any, if those numbers are not reconciled, then we would then need to go back and do further refinement before the fiscal year officially begins in July. But hopefully, you know, this was part of the question that you raised last time, Suzanne, of asking for a timeline. And hopefully this is a helpful discussion for people to see that, to get a sense of the overall time frame of what's in front of where we are and what's in front of us, and how many moving parts there are still, both on the PSB budget side and on the revenue side that's still being worked out.
So Mariah, this is helpful. Thank you very much. But could you just talk about the vote we're taking next week? I think I find that confusing in some ways.
So it's mandated by state law,
right,
that we vote a number before February 15th.
Right.
And so that is what we are doing. But it is a preliminary number based on our best information. And I would hope that, as we did last year, the school committee will vote the number that the superintendent has presented as the preliminary budget. And again, with the understanding that in May, the school committee will, there'll be a lot of process between now and then. And if needed, we would then vote. It could be a different bottom line number, but we would also vote other categories to have a more complete vote.
Andy, did you have your hand raised or did you take it down?
Took it down, thanks.
Okay. So the number that we're voting on next week is 130 million. I don't remember exactly. Is that's the number?
The 130.6.
130.6. Okay. And that's the number that we will give to advisory. And is that when you went back to that timeline? That's the number we'll be working from, if that's what we vote.
I mean, I would suppose that we could, if we make adjustments before May, we could present the other numbers, and if we choose as a body to take another vote before May. But assuming that this is the vote we take and we don't choose to take another vote before May, then yes, that would be the number we're working with.
Okay. Who has thoughts or questions? Yeah, Stephen and then Helen.
Helen, why don't you go first?
Well,
Okay,
I just want Mariah to be able to explain. So the town says they'll give us 125 million. We're saying we need 130. where do you think the other 5 million will come from?
So the revenue replacement discussion is ongoing. And we have town school partnership scheduled for next Friday, I believe. Our next town school partnership was just scheduled last night for next Friday. There appears to be updated information that would allow the select board, if the select board chose to be able to fund that gap using revenue replacement funds. So we are, so that would be one, for example, one source of the revenue gap. But again, this is part of what we're going to be going through over the next couple of months.
There's a lot that goes into the sausage
Mm-hmm.
before it comes out.
Yes, Stephen, and then Val, and then Susan.
Okay, thank you. So I just want to not so much ask these clarifying questions, but just state my understanding and have you, Mariah and Sam, tell me if I'm getting anything wrong. I'm just trying to boil it down for myself and for any people who are at my low level. So we didn't get an increase in the LEA last year over what we got in 2021. The level we were funded at was a little over 120, right?
It wasn't exactly level, was it, Sam? It was, but it was essentially level.
I'm sorry, it was first below, but I guess apples to apples with the additional 1.75 that was allocated in F21 and the additional 1.2 that was allocated this past November. Effectively, our budget in 22 was effectively level funded from 21.
Okay, so
a very small increment.
So that last increase for what we received from the town, the last significant increase was, according to the budget book, 3.22% from 2020 to 2021. It was essentially level funded for the next year. Now in 2023, we're making a request that A, makes up for the loss of ESSER funds, and B, continues, it essentially asks the town to make up for what they didn't give us last year and give us the next chunk for this coming year, as if it were rising continuously rather than rose, flattened, and then rose again. Is that a fair restatement?
Exactly. That's a fair statement, yes.
Okay, so bearing in mind how your responses to me last week when I started down this road, I just have a question about process. So do we expect, we're just making the request for what we think excellent schools will cost, regardless of the extent to which the town has demonstrated its capability of supporting that request, given the last couple of years, right? That's what this budget request represents.
Effectively, I guess I would frame it, this is what the need is to continue to move the system forward, period. And you're right, and the reason it's such a large percentage increase for the appropriation is to, as you stated, make up for the lack of, or the loss of the one-time ESSER funding. That's a $3 million driver of the coming year's request.
Okay, then I'll just restate again that I'm anxious to have a discussion on the process for plans B through E, if the town shouldn't give us our request or should give us less than our request and so on. But I'm happy to hear from the rest of you on when that's appropriate. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Val?
I just had a question. Our circuit breaker looks like it is going up significantly in FY23. Is that accurate?
It is.
Okay.
It's going up approximately $800,000 from the year before. And that's why, again, our ask, believe it or not, is not higher, because the amount of increase in out-of-district tuition and transportation will be covered under circuit breaker, and we haven't increased the operating budget in those categories where normally we would year over year.
Okay, no, that's great. And then this ESSER again, just to clarify, I'm looking at page 26 of the budget book for anybody who is wanting to follow. In terms of ESSER, just for anybody out there who's watching, I want to clarify for myself, that's just pure ESSER. That has nothing to do with revenue replacement currently, right? There's no revenue.
No, when you speak of revenue replacement, that's ARPA.
ARP. Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Val. Susan, and then Andy.
Yeah. I have one technical question, which is, I know tonight is our budget hearing, our public hearing. I don't remember us opening it and closing it. So we might still need to actually do that, regardless of whether anyone signed up. We might need to actually just open it and close it. So one technical point. I guess I just want to reiterate what I've said for the last couple of budget cycles, which is that I'm concerned about our ability to explain what this budget does to the cliff that we're creating. And especially if we are in any way suggesting that we're making the cliff steeper by adding to the base with one-time revenues. So I think it's probably important. It's for me anyway, I think it's important before we sort of vote on a budget that we understand, like, again, if we're going to be in this year's budget, increasing personnel, for example, understanding what that does in a multi-year way to the cliff. So, for example, if we were to hear that a certain amount is going to come through revenue replacement that will help us this year, that's great. That's important to know. And it's also important to make sure that our multi-year sense, not that anybody has a magic crystal ball and things change all the time, but make sure that we have an aligned sense with the town, with the advisory committee and others about what our revenue projections are in future years. Because I think if we're assuming a much higher jump in ongoing revenue rebound than the town is, I think we're kind of setting ourselves on a possible collision course with the town budget. So I do think that we need to be able, especially if we're going to pass a budget that or vote a number that is significantly higher than the number that we, kind of that makes it through the town school partnership process. I think we need clarity as to what will happen if we don't get the full amount, at least categorically. If we're talking 50 FTEs or whatever the number is, I think we just need to have a sense of how far off it is. And then I think conceptual responses to the cliff, especially if we're making it worse with this number. So I feel the need to say that again, because I voted against the budget the last 2 years, and that's why, and I would prefer not to vote against it again, but I'm concerned about a 1-year budget vote without sort of a multi-year sense. So anyway, I'll just say the same thing I've said in the last few meetings. So.
Did anyone want to respond to that, or Mariah?
Well, I'm happy to respond to it, but I could also wait for Andy to go first because he had his hand up first. Whatever you all.
He did it. Okay.
Yeah, I think you can probably respond to me along with to Susan
Okay.
and
That's
Steve,
what I thought.
but I intend to continue the line of thought that they began. I mean, and maybe look at our trajectory over time and push it into fiscal year 24, and which I think is legitimate because our budget book does that. Right. So I think if you look at our LEA requests over time, so it rose by 3.2% going into fiscal year 21. If you average 22 and 23, that's increasing an average of 3.9 to 4% a year. And then according to the budget book, it's going to go up by close to 6% next year, right? So we're not just proposing steady growth, we're proposing accelerating growth in a period when our enrollment has dropped by 10% and has not rebounded this year, right? And if I'm reading the bar charts right in the budget book, by fiscal year 24, this gap, our structural deficit may have increased to $10 million or more. And that's something, we could only conceivably close that with a sizable tax increase. And so I'm wondering, how are we going to make the case for a big tax increase to fund that kind of gap at a time when enrollment has gone down and so far has stayed down?
Shall I, Suzanne? Okay, you're on
Yeah,
mute,
go
but I
ahead.
think you said go ahead. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think that there's a couple things going on. One is, and the first, actually, I'm going to show a slide that is really just from, it was presented I presented it at the BPO budget forum on Sunday, if I can find it and pull it up. But I think it's helpful to look at. Okay, so this is, can you all see this? Okay, so this is the town's long-range financial forecast. And probably most of you have seen it before, but on the odds that people haven't seen it,
Can you make it a little bit bigger, Mariah? Is that possible?
How's that? Is that better?
Yeah, well, that's a lot better. Yeah.
Okay, good. So this comes straight out of the town's long-range financial plan, which the URL for that is at the top of the page. Or if you go to the town's website, which is brooklinema.gov, and click on the Budget Central button, it will take you to the page where you can get the presentation from which I took this slide. And I just want to illustrate here that this is the town's calculation of its revenue. The upcoming year that we're talking about is FY23. And you can see the revenue increases that they have over the coming years, and you can see how they break it down in terms of source of revenue. And then you can see down here on the expenditures, and you can see the rate of growth in expenditures, and you can see whether it's a surplus or a deficit. And I would like to highlight that there is a cumulative deficit over the next 5 years projected, and that it is on the town side and on the school side. And the town side, you can see the numbers, and the school side, you can see the numbers. And they worsen over time. They don't level off, they worsen over time. And it's not just a school's problem, it's a town and school problem. So I'm just going to stop sharing that. That's a little bit of context for, do we see where this is going? I think this is some of Susan's question. And I believe that this was brought up at the town budget forum last Thursday as well, that it's very likely that we're going to need an override for FY24 for both the town and the schools to cover what's really a structural deficit, which is inherently costs rise faster than our revenues can rise with them. In terms of the enrollment, I'm going to reference back to Susan's crystal ball that we talked about a couple of minutes ago, and we don't know what's coming. Part of, I think we've all discussed, the gap or the dip in enrollment has been related to, at least in part, international students that returned home and their successor students have not come back to the United States. I think that we don't know this for sure, but I think that a lot of the discussion is about we're in the moment of shifting from a pandemic phase to an endemic phase. And, does that mean that we are going to have a boost in closer to pre-pandemic enrollment levels? I don't think that anyone knows, but I don't think that that's an unreasonable guess as to where we're going for whether it's fall of 2022 or fall of 2023, not in the long future. But the other thing is that, and I'm sure I'm telling everyone things that they know already, when you have a classroom with, just to give an example, to give the micro example, you have a classroom with 21 students and you take 3 of them out, and you had 21 students and 1 teacher, you take 3 students out, you still have 1 teacher, right? So the idea that costs are reduced linearly with reduction in students is not true. When we zoom that out to the macro level, at the system level, of course, there are spaces where we find efficiencies, but again, it's not necessarily that if you have a reduction in enrollment of 10%, that you have a reduction in costs of 10%. And furthermore, if we see a bounce back in our enrollment, then again, which as we convert from a pandemic to an endemic phase, we may find that is where we're at, then that question of enrollment, again, becomes not a question. So that's my response to, I think, all of those different things.
Well,
I was hoping that, if there was if people had any more thoughts about putting out there that there's this override that is likely for FY24.
So would that be, I'm kind of thinking about Stephen's thought about Plan B, C, D, and E.
Well, Plan B, C, D, and E are related to FY23, I think. And an override would not be for the fiscal year starting this July. An override would be for a fiscal year starting July 1, 2023, correct? So now we're talking about multi-year planning at this point, not just for the upcoming year. And I think, you know, we go back and the last override was in it was in May 2018 it was a 3-year override for fiscal years 19, 20, 21. We're currently in fiscal year 22. So we've made a 3-year override last 4 years. We're looking at if we can use the revenue replacement funds for a 5th year into a 3rd year override. And so we'd be talking about an override starting in year 6.
Yes, Stephen.
Right, that was really helpful. Thanks. So you cut to it to say, like, if we're not gonna be able to, if our town doesn't raise revenues, we're going to have to come up with either budget cuts or an override. So if we are going to make a compelling case for an override, I want to make sure that I have a really strong understanding of the rationale for the escalations built into the budget over the next chunk of years. So I understand it goes from 3.22 to around, I think, Andy, you said an average around 4% for the last couple of years, then 5%, then it jumps up to 7%, but that's for the strategic planning funds that we're earmarking, and then it goes back down to 5%. So if I understand right, we're expecting it to level off at around 5.5%. Is that right?
You're talking about year-on-year budget growth going forward?
Yeah.
Sam, I would defer to you, but it's my understanding that typically the sort of total budget growth is around 4 to 5%, maybe 6, I don't know, around 5 somewhere. And then
I think in Brookline, looking both historically and in the long-term future, I think those numbers are trending in the high 4s to 5, after the peak, so to speak. Just to provide some clarity of where we are now, and then I think it's, continuing conversation with the committee, but I think you made it clear, Mariah, and I just wanted to reiterate, overrides and that are really not for the budget that we're talking about right now that you'll vote on next week, the 130.6 million. That is really the only additional revenue, or at least a potential, the most potential source to mitigate the gap that we currently have is revenue replacement under the American Rescue Plan Act money. And there's a process with the select board, as I understand it, on how that money, if at all, is when and how much is going to be allocated. And that's going to be a big factor in what plans B through E, so to speak, we will have to arrive at, depending on where those final numbers sit. And again, I'll stop talking, but I think that's really what we're talking about between now and May is the big moving part.
So Sam, I appreciate that, and I understand that. All I'm asking is if you anticipate the budget escalations to continue through 2027, or whether they're going to level off at some point, because if we're going to promote an override, I would think that we have to have a really strong understanding of the drivers of this escalation, and they're not enrollment. They're not some major structural change like the new importance of special education, where it didn't exist 2 generations ago. Is it going to continue to escalate in these projections, or is it going to level off at a certain percentage?
Stephen, you know that our budget is principally staff. right? And if we look at what are the drivers of staff costs rising year to year, we have the cost of basically the contractually agreed upon costs. And those are the largest driver in the budget. So whatever you see the steps and lanes are, plus the incremental raises on top of that, right? That everyone receives, plus the steps and lanes that some people receive, depending on where they are, is what drives the cost. And so we don't know for sure that it's going to be 5%. In theory, some school committee could, negotiate a lower or a higher, range of agreement with that would then affect how that growth changes. But the largest driver of costs in the budget of the increase is personnel costs. And those are structural costs based on the steps and lanes structure of the budget, plus whatever is agreed to in terms of annual increases. Sam, would you disagree with any of that?
No, no, I wouldn't. That's spot on, Mariah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mariah. I guess that just underscores my worry that it's going to be politically difficult. I'm not sure where the community stands right now on escalating costs due to escalating teacher and other educator salaries.
Okay, we're going to go to Andy and then Susan. Andy?
Yeah, thanks. Right, since we're talking about an override, I feel the need to remind everybody that this fall we're likely to go to the voters with a debt exclusion request for Pierce that's likely to be in the neighborhood of $200 million. And there's also going to be a fire station debt exclusion vote. I've heard the number 40 million thrown around for that one. And this override would either be on the ballot with those or be on the ballot at roughly the same time as those. And so this makes me very nervous about undertaking new commitments, even in the FY23 budget, such as adding new staff positions that can only be locked in, through a successful override next year, which I'm not willing to bank on that, to be honest, and not in this political climate and now with all the other things we have to pay for right now.
Thanks, Andy. Susan?
So a couple thoughts. One is that to the extent that we are contemplating relying on override funds, we owe it to ourselves, first and foremost, as kind of the fiscal stewards of the money, but also to the public and the voters to explain, to kind of make the case for sort of what's at stake, what it is that would be lost if an override failed. I think it's very challenging to do that without being alarmist and without scaring staff, scaring parents unnecessarily. But at some level, it's actually not unnecessarily. It's necessarily, because if people don't understand what's at stake, what it is that would be lost, and I'm not talking about like this person would lose their job, but conceptually speaking, we're off by so many millions of dollars that it would be pretty significant to try to take that much money out of an ongoing budget. I do think we owe it to ourselves as fiscal stewards and to the voters to give people a sense of the kinds of the order of magnitude, the kinds of things that would be lost if an override failed. So I think that's just one piece. I think, Sam, I 100% agree with you that technically speaking, the revenue replacement number drives is sort of more immediately and acutely it impacts the FY23 budget. All I would say is that there is a different way to think about revenue replacement, which is that the more we had, if they were to say you can have an unlimited amount, that it isn't a good idea for us because again, it makes the cliff steeper and it's adding more, just as Andy said, it's adding more positions that are kind of immediately put at risk. And so I think there's how much money we can get from revenue replacement, but I think there's also mindfulness that we're going to have to justify every position, we show the voter, show the town that we've done our due diligence and scrubbed the budget as much as we, possibly can before we're asking for additional funds, living outside our means. And so historically speaking, there have been, pretty careful conversations about things like what's been added, what's been lost. Mariah, just as your example demonstrated, it's certainly true that if you take out, 3 kids from one building in a 3rd grade, you don't remove that much cost from the system because you've just essentially reduced class size. And while that's true at a marginal level, at a 10% level, you really should be able to see significant reductions in staff. And the reason we didn't is because specifically during the pandemic, there were increases that we had that were required. But I think steady state, if we were to say the enrollment in the district has gone down by 10%, that's the new normal. Absent COVID, we absolutely should be seeing significant consolidations. You're not going to get 10% out, but they better be significant, because otherwise the argument that we've been making, which is that when we increase enrollment by 10%, we need additional resources. That argument doesn't hold either. You can't say you need them on the upswing and you can't get rid of them on the downswing. That doesn't hold, because the reality is that you're right, at 1, 2, 3 kids, it doesn't matter, but at 10%, we should have seen significant reductions. And the reason we didn't is because of COVID. And in fact, we added positions like the guidance counselors and other things, but that was sort of an extraordinary set of expenses. And so I think we're going to have to kind of pull apart some of this in a very simple way for people so that they understand, well, when enrollment went down, why didn't our budget go down? Not only 10%, why didn't it even go down 5%? And things were added. Why were they added? And now that COVID's over, whatever over means, why can't you take them out? So I think that there's some narrative work we need to do to be able to explain the budget, but all of which is to say, I do think that we need to be able to think through the consequences in a multi-year way of a 1-year budget vote, and be able to explain that to people, because if we don't get additional override funds and we're building a bigger cliff, that isn't going to feel responsible. It doesn't feel responsible as a steward, I'm not sure it'll sound responsible. So just needed to add those in.
Mariah, did you want to speak?
Yeah, I just wanted to make one clarifying point, which I don't think you meant to make this point, Susan, but I want to make sure it wasn't misinterpreted, which was you talked about the revenue replacement funds and then adding positions. And I just wanted to make sure people were clear that we were not adding positions to the tune of the value of the revenue replacement dollars. The revenue replacement dollars that we're talking about is in the order of $5 million. And there are some new positions in the budget, but it is to the order of less than $1 million and not $5 million. So if we were to, for example, say that if we were to not receive the revenue replacement, it would actually mean a cut to the program. Not this, that we weren't adding any of the requests, but that there would be a cut to the program this year, just to be super clear on that, in case anyone was confused. Thank you, Susan. Yeah. And then the other thing I wanted to say was about, I completely agree with you about there could be cuts. I don't think if you had a 10% enrollment, you would necessarily have a 10%, but you're right, you would have some number of cuts greater than 0 and less than 10 would be somewhere in that range. And what that is, for the staff to articulate and explain to everyone. But the other thing is that, as I said, if we might have an override, right? We are going to find out what our enrollment is in the fall and see, I expect we'll have some bounce back. But the other thing is we might still need an override, and we might find that we are cutting or adjusting our program down, scaling it down to the right sizing it to our enrollment, and yet still need an override because our costs are still exceeding over this long-term 6-year slope. Our costs are still exceeding our revenues due to the sort of structural deficit that the personnel costs drive to the budget. So I just want to say that, like, we might have an override and it might be smaller than it needs to be, or than it could be, but it might still be a necessary override given the many shifting parts and the structural growth to costs from personnel.
Thank you, Mariah. Helen, Jennifer, David, do you want to jump in at all? Yeah, Jennifer?
I agree with a lot of the concerns that have been voiced. I don't think that I have new words to say that will replace, to add anything to what people have already said, but I'm concerned about the long-term impacts, our ability to get an override passed. And I think I'm very eager to see us work on some budgets that take into account us not getting the revenue replacement so that we can begin that work, because that's a whole process. And so I think it would be nice for us to be able to have something to look at before we vote that number. It's a really big deficit.
Thanks, Jennifer. David?
Along similar lines to what Jennifer just stated, I think it would be helpful for us to look at multiple budgets so that we would have an understanding of what we would potentially be sacrificing if we were not to use the revenue replacement money as we're currently slating it, and what the implications would be for not pursuing an override. I think that also creates a picture for the community in order for the community to ultimately decide whether they think it would be appropriate or not to pursue an override. I think we've got a sense of that by presenting various budgets. I understand that it's very difficult to articulate areas where cuts would be made, but based on this conversation, I think it's fairly obvious that whether we like it or not, the primary driver is salary. So there would probably teacher salary. So there probably would need to be cuts there in order to not use revenue replacement money. And I think we just have to be very candid about that and then see what the public thinks and what the overall numbers look like for us.
Sorry, the driver of the escalation is personnel? Or I know the personnel is the biggest cost, but we're saying that the driver of escalations going forward is personnel. So it's baked into our structure for compensation. Thank you.
Helen or Val, did you want to jump in at all? You don't have to, just asking.
Oh, go ahead, Val. You go first. Sure.
Go ahead, Helen. Yeah.
I'm just sort of taking this in, and I must say I have my concerns about any sort of override at this point, or even discussing it. I think that we need to do our due diligence. We need to ask our staff to do their due diligence and where efficiencies. I think I talked about that last time. I would like to see those efficiencies, hopefully even before we vote on bottom number, so that we know, we're more aware of what it is we're voting. I mean, obviously this number shifts. The GIC could shift, $500,000 one way or the other. There are a lot of things that are moving pieces here. But I do think that we need to think long and hard about what Susan was saying. Making the cliff higher doesn't help us. I'm fully aware, Andy, you were off by about 25 million in the debt exclusion, 220 for probably, I mean, it's not for sure, we don't have the numbers yet, but probably 220 for the Pierce School and 45 million for the fire station. That's a lot of money in taxes. And then if you add on to that, a tax that continues forever, that's a tax that ends eventually. We're probably getting to the end of the Runkle override that we had. So actually we didn't have an override for Runkle. We were able to do that in the budget because it was 28 million to build it. But we will be getting to the end of some of the other debt exclusions that we've had. So those are my thoughts. They're sort of conglomeration of things, but I would like to see what efficiencies we can do now at this point in our budget.
So I just wanted to go back to what David and Jennifer said about looking at different numbers. You know, we can't put an override on the ballot. That's not within our power, right? So that's a community decision, a select board. There's a whole process that's outside of the school committee. So I do think that asking the staff to put a couple of scenarios together about what that 5.5 to 7 million, depending upon what number we're looking at, what that cliff looks like. And it again depends if you're incorporating the adjustment counselors that were added with ESSER and, you know, other positions that have been added over the last couple of years. We really need to put a picture together of what that looks like, I think, for the community, so that we can make a decision as a town and make informed recommendations as a body.
Can I ask a clarifying question, if possible? Because I'm hearing different things, and timing is everything. We in a week's time, there's going to be by the body of the school committee a vote on a recommended budget. And what I know two things right now. I know with the revised town school partnership calculation that was shared with us by Mel Friday, and the number that's before you today, that gap is $5.8 million. I guess it's been my understanding, and I'm hearing different things, that's why I'm asking, is I don't know if we're equipped to speak with the thoughtfulness necessary within a week's time to say this is what a $5.8 million reduction, where it would go and what the impact would be. And that assumes $0 from revenue replacement being allocated. And so I guess getting some more direction would be helpful, but because I'm hearing all these different things, and we have 7 days before you come back and decide a number.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right, Sam. That's what I'm hearing. That I think if you were to take the vote right now, I'm not sure you would get a vote for 130 million. I don't know that. I'm just listening to people, and I think they would like a number that might come in under that number. If you could explain.
Well, can I push back on that a little bit and say I would
Mark.
feel very confident putting in a motion for 130.6 million, and I would expect that we would have, I would expect, I don't know, that we would have support. I think that Sam's point is well taken, which is that and this builds on what Susan said earlier, is that we can have thinking about what might change, but we don't want to be alarmist for, there's a balance here. And so about, what might make people concerned, and making sure that we don't concern people, especially where it might be a necessary concern. And I just want to emphasize too, that the February 10th budget vote is not the last vote you're going to take. You're going to have a vote again in May. And I want to make sure that people don't get too connected to the February 10th vote as being the be all and end all of what you think. That is a preliminary budget vote. And we have several months with which to work through not only how the revenues go up, as that timeline slide showed, but how we may make other adjustments on the budget as well, working together. So next week, I'm certainly going to make a motion for the full amount of the superintendent's request.
And you certainly can do that, Mariah. I'm just trying to, I'm taking the pulse a little bit, the best I can over Zoom. And it's not feeling like everybody's comfortable with that at this point. As more than one that's not feeling comfortable. So I'm just trying to figure out, how we get to a number that works for people. Jennifer, then Andy.
I mean, I would say that I'm comfortable using some of the revenue replacement money, I think, to close that number. My concern is where we start to accumulate a much greater percentage over time, where we're adding things in that we already, that we know we will not be able to afford the following year. So I think that there is a balance, I think, and we need to think about what happens long-term if we don't have the override. So I think we just need to be really thoughtful about what we think we need for next year, so that we are setting ourselves up for success in future years. So I would say that I wouldn't say, I think David was responding to one of my comments. David, I don't want to put words in your mouth. If I misunderstood, please clarify that. I was getting the feeling that you were much less comfortable with using any of the revenue replacement, or at least contemplating that. And so this is the reason for my comment. I'm okay with using some of it, but I'm hearing concern, and I would need to have more information, hearing concern from others about how that will set us up in future years. David, did you look like you wanted to respond to?
Yes, to be clear, I would be willing to use some of it. I don't rule anything out. I just think that it should be a combination of looking for greater efficiencies within our means, also using some replacement money, but with a mind toward the impact it has in future years, and hopefully not exacerbating the fiscal cliff. So I think it's a combination. I don't want to just rely exclusively on revenue replacement funds.
Thank you, David. It was just helpful for me to make sure I was understanding where other committee members are coming from. I think I'm probably somewhere in there. I just don't want to, I guess I'm just trying to be mindful that we don't end up a year from now with a $6 million deficit and no possible revenue replacement funds, because that's just, it's just really tough. I've seen in the last few years what the unfortunate consequences of some of the budget conversations have had on our staff and on the community. And so that's why I asked for us to start thinking about, well, if we don't get that money, what will we do? So I guess to your point, Mariah, I'm comfortable asking for a number, knowing that that number is the beginning. We don't even know if we would get revenue replacement, and that number could go down. It doesn't mean that we would have to spend that money if we're asking for it. Do you know what I'm saying? So I don't know. I guess maybe I sound all over the place now, but I'm just trying to play out a bunch of scenarios in real time. So I apologize.
Yeah. Andy, did you want to say something?
It's a bit redundant after what Jennifer and David have said. I think, in response to Mariah, even if I were 100% sure that we could cover the current budget request using revenue replacement, I would still be very uncomfortable supporting it, simply because I believe it locks us further into a trajectory that we can't be on, which is one of accelerating growth.
Accelerating growth. Talk more about that.
Year on year, steady growth would be if we were increasing by the same percentage every year, and that percentage were greater than 2.5. We'd still have a structural deficit. But what I was saying before is that our year-on-year growth and our requested LEA has gone from 3.2 to 3.9 to 3.9 to FY24, apparently close to 6%. And we cannot be on this trajectory unless we're absolutely sure we're going to get a big override and it'll be successful in the fall. And I don't believe that, actually. So, my discomfort.
I'm not sure that it's actually accelerating growth.
My discomfort is not with whether we can make ends meet in fiscal year 23, although even that is uncertain. It's mainly with what happens after that.
I'm not sure it's actually accelerating growth, but I appreciate that the chart cuts off at the moment that you could tell that it's not accelerating. That's the problem.
Yeah, I think the discussion went a little bit beyond 24 a little bit, but that's not in the budget book, so I don't have it in front of me.
Actually, it is in the budget book. But it's on the town school. It's on the long range forecast page. It's on a different page.
Yeah. Jennifer, did you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of swing around at this. I'm making some just different notes, bring us back. This idea of an override, I mean, for me, it's not off the table. I think there's a structural deficit on the town side as well as the school side. And I just want to bring us back to that. It's not simply that we're outspending, beyond our means. Prop 2.5 limits us. And that's a problem for a lot of municipalities. It's not just a Brookline thing. And to my knowledge, if I'm incorrect, please someone clarify me. I'm not. I don't live and breathe this the way many of you do.
Over time, we have gotten more than 2.5% over the years, probably closer to 4%, 4 to 5, because there's been growth, because the pandemic has cut into a lot of revenue sources that we've had. We've gotten other ones, but they're one-time sources. The revenue sources that we've had, the hotels, things like that are down, I'm sure. Even marijuana isn't, they're up, but everybody else is. And so, I think we never grow just at 2.5%. We grow more than that. That being said, the jump to 6% and going, sort of adding staff and not looking at efficiencies will not serve us well, is what I worry about.
Yeah, Mariah, and then we're going to close this up for now. I'm not sure.
Well, maybe this will be a good ending comment, which is I'm looking forward to, I hope it's a good ending comment because it's going to be the ending comment. I'm looking forward to Linus's strategic planning over the coming spring, sort of the conclusions, because I think that as I think about where I want our investments to be over the coming years, and how we might be thinking about changes to where we invest our money, that might actually mean that we find that 6% goes back down because there's some programs we find that aren't producing or other things that we think are worth investing in. And I'm looking forward to learning more about that. The forecast that is put together is not the FY23, but going out really is a very rough projection. And I think we're going to get a lot more information and refinement of applying Linus's vision to practice. And then being able to ourselves contribute to, what that looks like and where we'd like to see investments made. And so I think that'll be a helpful process over the spring as well to get some clarity.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Mariah. I think when we get your strategic plan, Dr. Guillory, that will really help us understand what the priorities are and, how we will fund those. Because we want to fund, what your strategic plan is once we learn it. But, we may have to find efficiencies, as we've been saying, in order to support some of that. Or there may be, there's going to be some give and take with that. So the vote is for next week. I have no idea how it's going to come out. We've talked a lot tonight. I think we're still hearing that people would like at least some idea of where some of those efficiencies may be found if we need them. Yeah, I think that's what we're going to need to do. That's the only thing on the agenda next week's meeting.
Yeah.
So it can be long or short.
Quick thought, if the staff needs more time or if it makes a difference, I think we have until the 15th to vote it. I don't think it has to be voted on the 10th. So,
right,
and since it's just
well, I know, but the 15th is Tuesday. So, we're meeting again on Thursday, the 17th. So I'm not sure how we get that in.
Oh,
we're meeting on the 10th, which is a
Well,
Thursday.
we could talk about it. We could, if we needed to, we could maybe make adjustments, but let's see if that could be our plan B or C, D, E, like Steven said,
I'm just
planning.
throwing it out
Okay.
there. I have no
Yeah.
idea if it's possible, but throwing it out there.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. I am declaring that it was open. The public comment was open. We had no speakers tonight to address the budget or make comments. And so I am now officially closing a public comment on the budget and the school choice law. So thank you very much for your input. I know Dr. Guillory was taking lots of notes. And I'm sure Mariah and Sam and Linus will be meeting to figure out for next week what they have. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your attention to this. It's an important matter, budget speak. So we're going to move now to another very exciting topic, actually, and that is to Janae. Are you going to, you're up next? You're going to do your report of your findings?
Sure, thank you. Thank you, I think. Oh, great, thank you. Well, thank you, everybody. It's great to hear that people were taking notes, because I would maybe recommend doing that during some of this as well. This is my report of findings and next steps. And I just want to provide a little bit of context as we start to go through. I know many of you have been in the district for 15 years, it turns out. I started here as a parent. My daughter just graduated in June from BHS, and I was a teacher at the Lincoln School, the 7th and 8th grade teacher, and then moved to BHS to teach English, and then move into some administrative roles. And I have obviously shifted roles now and into the Senior Director of Educational Equity position. And this was an opportunity for me to think about structural inequities system-wide, which I had not had the ability to do before now. And so, like Dr. Guillory, it was important for me, even though I wasn't brand new here, to collect information systemically, to sort of reacquaint myself with our K-8s in particular, and become further immersed here, and to develop a deeper understanding of our strengths and our issues. So Aaron, if you would go to the next slide. So it's with that sort of lens that I began my entry plan. And so tonight's goals, and in this slide deck presentation tonight, we're going to sort of focus my findings and some of what I've learned and what I'm thinking about and we're thinking about for next steps with these goals. First, to understand our vision of educational equity and its connection to the entry planning, to also communicate all the whys, like why does this matter? Why are we really doing this? Diagnose where we are based on those findings, and then to demonstrate the alignment of equity to student outcomes, and share a little bit of a roadmap to next steps. So thank you, Aaron. Thank you. So just some of my goals coming in, and as I sort of embarked on the entry planning piece for the last 6 months, as you can see there, I was thinking about doing a lot of listening, building some trust, and having lots of conversations, the two-way communication, even more than two-way communication happening, and responding to what I was hearing and what I was seeing. This was about setting a tone for learning. We are a learning organization, and that's what I care so much about, and we all care about, and sort of finding joy in that learning. Another thing to know, just sort of coming in, my sort of definition around systemic equity was really based in Bradley Scott. And in 2001, he said that systemic equity is defined as the transformed ways in which systems and individuals habitually operate to ensure that every learner, in whatever learning environment that learner is found, has the greatest opportunity to learn, enhanced by the resources and the supports necessary to achieve competence, excellence, independence, responsibility, self-sufficiency, et cetera, for school and for life. And so that was one of my sort of guiding benchmarks in thinking about equity. The other definition that I love is the National Equity Project's definition of instructional equity that includes, very importantly, reducing the predictability of who succeeds and who fails, and also obviously interrupting the reproductive practices that negatively impact students. So a lot of this work in entry planning was looking at what those were, and cultivating the gifts and talents of every student. So those are a couple sort of the guiding equity sort of frameworks I was thinking about going in. Aaron, if you don't mind going to the next slide. So here's a slide that I'd love to take a few minutes with, if you all will indulge me. And when I thought about an approach to diagnosing, sort of marking where we were as a district coming in, a guide for me is this diversity, belonging, inclusion, and equity spectrum. And so I'm going to take a couple minutes to kind of go through this. I've talked and we've talked a lot about this spectrum in the district and with our various schools. So a couple of things to pay attention to as you look at the spectrum. There's an arrow at the top that says the sense of loss increases as you move closer to creating equitable culture. And so I want us to not think about getting to equity as a dangerous thing. And this is what we've talked about with educators, but that it's about fairness. And this is a communication tool. There's circles underneath that you'll notice with little arrows on the ends. And those circles mean that the journey is not linear, thank God. We don't just go from diversity to belonging to inclusion to equity in a straight line. But we often have to do multiple types of these strategies all at the same time sometimes. Then the buckets underneath that you see are descriptions of the terms, and then the squares under, or I guess they're rectangles underneath those buckets are an analogy to a party. So again, we can use the spectrum for a variety of things. We can use it to communicate our journey and where we're at on it, how we're doing, how we want to track our change over time. And we can obviously use it as a tool in many ways to diagnosis, which is part of what I was thinking about doing here. Going back up to the top once more, people don't fear change, but people fear loss. And that's, again, what the top of this spectrum is communicating. And so people often feel fear anytime we are asked to change behavior. And that's what equity is calling us to do. So this is not obviously about being a bad person, but to do new things. We have to learn new things. And that's where we are. This work requires different types and different kinds of movement. And so we worry as educators, as parents, et cetera, about what that might look like for us. The example that I use with educators often is last week we felt pretty good, pretty confident that we knew how to do our jobs. And then, bring in another week and someone's introducing something new that we need to do, but we haven't necessarily been taught how to do it. So we worry about the loss of what we thought we knew how to do. And we also obviously worry that if we have trouble or struggles around it, that we might get called racist, as an example, or we might get canceled, or we might look different to our friends and family members and our colleagues. So this matters, obviously, because the deeper you go on this journey, the more loss you feel, even though the journey is positive. So I'm going to start with diversity. And again, I'll go through a couple things here, and forgive me if I'm getting a little bit into teacher mode, but I'm hoping that as I do some of this, it will help sort of describe and explain the scope of the work. So in diversity, for example, people usually love it because it feels a lot like equality. Everyone's getting to have an equal share and an equal voice about different things. But over time, again, we have to give up more. We have to listen a little bit more. We have to negotiate things like privilege, or we're doing a lot of defining of things like privilege. And I do want to say that privilege isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it does mean that we never have to worry, when we have privilege, we never have to worry about something that someone else is thinking about constantly. And so the journey to equity calls us to think about things like access and privilege, opportunity, which obviously changes how things appear. The circles, again, just underneath that arrow, let us know that at any given point, we want to meet people where they are, and that, again, this is a flexible and ongoing sort of process. So diversity is the beginning of the work. You're taking a look at that bucket. It's not the end goal. The purpose of diversity is to get people comfortable talking to each other as people outside of work. Or outside of school. It's not diversification. Sometimes we see diversity and we think diversification. It's not diversification by race or by gender or by ability. Diversity asks, how have we as a system created a space for people to be able to talk about themselves as people? And so the goal of diversity is to build empathy. So many of us in the PSB, as parents, as community members, we haven't really had a chance to talk to each other about who we are as people. So in our school, we do a lot of assuming. So in our schools, this looks like icebreakers. It looks like diversity, looks like team builders. It looks like retreats to build community. But I will say that we often jump to inclusion. So looking at the spectrum, you see that there's 2 steps before inclusion. And I just want to say kind of quickly that inclusion is where we diversify staff. So if you think about this, some staff of color, as an example, don't feel very comfortable in our school system. And I would like to argue that that's because we haven't built community. We jumped straight to inclusion. Belonging, back to the buckets, is the sweet spot. The goal of belonging is about creating opportunities and spaces for people to tell us what they need in a new way to be seen. And Dr. Dubois came on several sessions ago to talk about belonging. And it's so important for us. We often in our schools ask people to change for our culture, which makes students, which makes some colleagues feel invisible, and we can't be productive if we don't feel seen. So for us, being welcomed in this belonging piece is when people feel like we understand who they are and what they need and any of their areas of difference. And I want to say here too, a lot of times we as a system, we think about equity, we think about anti-racism, and I want to say that the journey to equity is not just focused on race. It includes race, but it's not limited to race. And so we do want everyone, and when we're thinking about belonging, to feel authentically relationshiped in our system. That's students, that's adults. Belonging requires affinity spaces, and we can talk about that a little bit later. So we have to give people the opportunity to talk about their non-belonging so that they can manifest belonging. And this again matters so much. If we try to do inclusion before belonging, which we have tried, people feel tokenized. They don't feel like they're in relationship. They feel like they are here, for example, for the look of them and not what they can do. And I often think about our METCO students and families in terms of that. Quickly going on to inclusion. Inclusion is where we do the diversification. It's not a lowering of standards. It's all about perspectives. So whose perspectives are showing up to the tables where we plan our future? Whose perspectives are there when we talk about hiring and priorities and mentorships, and where are they on our org charts? So those are some things there. Finally, equity. This is the one that sometimes scares people, quite honestly, and some of what I've observed. And I want to say something about equity and equality, because sometimes we conflate the two. Equality assumes, as I think we all know, but just as a reminder, equality assumes that if you give everyone the same thing, everyone can achieve the same thing. If you work hard, you can make it. But equity knows that there are ceilings. There are glass ceilings. There are visible ceilings. There are neurodiversity ceilings. There are linguistic ceilings and gender ceilings and racial ceilings and so many ceilings for many different types of identities that prevent people from truly achieving everything that they can. So equity says that we have to take into account that for everyone to be truly equal, we have to change policies. Inequity lives in design, and I will talk a little bit about that in one of the slides coming up. If we're not thinking about all of these pieces, people cannot be successful. So the last thing I'll say about the spectrum, and we'll move on, is that typically to do all of this well takes 8 to 10 years. And Dr. Guillory and I've talked a lot about this. I will say that all of the work that we're doing currently in PSB and that we've been doing is helping us get there. So diversity, belonging, and inclusion get us to equity. This spectrum assumes that we're doing what I'm talking about here, and we certainly are. And I can say more about some of those pieces in a little bit. So thank you, Erin. We can move on. One other thing that I'll mention here is as we think about that spectrum and some of what I've been talking about with colleagues, and what I would love to share with you all in school committee is thinking about how we communicate our whys. The first why is the moral why. And so I do need school committee members and educators and parents to know and stand behind our moral why. Equity is important in the world for all of us. It's about the deepening of humanity. That's our moral why. Equity is just the organizational change plus social emotional skills and belonging. So it's not just about, I've heard different things. It's not just about saving our Black and brown children. It's like universal design, which means that when the focus is on the least of us, the most of us can grow. So our moral why lives rightly and already at the superintendent level. It should also live at the school committee level. I and we need all of us to be able to argue for the morality of inclusion. And I'd just like to say too here before we move down to the third bullet, which is our district, that in order to understand the work as school committee members, as a community in general, you have to understand the work in order to support the vision. And that's why I'm going through these. So as we get to the third why, the third bullet, just to say, we've been looking at a lot of this, is it's all about data. It's our chart dark data. So what our demographics show to us, our high needs, our economically disadvantaged, what are our enrollment numbers, attendance, retention, our pathways. And so, using the data from our district, that's how we actually articulate the why this work, why us, why PSB, why this work, and why now. The last thing I'll say in terms of this third bullet, it's important for me to say that this is not about identity politics or the 1619 Project, for example, or blaming white children, so critical race theory. It's not that. We're doing this because, for example, I'm thinking about Casey Miller's presentation a couple weeks, I guess it was several weeks ago now. We're doing this because 20% of the 21% of students in special education with a special learning disability are Black or African American. We're doing this because barely 25% of our Black and African American students, for example, felt safe at school in the Panorama survey data that Matt Dubois talked to us about. And by the way, our AAPI students were just at 30% who felt safe in our schools. So those are just some examples of, why PSB, why this work, and why now. Then the last one is the one in the middle. Why is dismantling inequity so important to you? I'm hoping that everyone on this call today and throughout our district can come up with a paragraph to articulate for yourselves. Why is dismantling inequity so important to you? We define this for ourselves. I want to say that in my role, I am the beacon of the district why. So that third bullet, but we each need our own whys. I want you all to know that I am here because I care about all kids and I care about inclusion. Erin, you can advance that slide. Thank you. So my key focus areas in coming in are there. And as we go through the rest of the remaining slides, you'll get a chance to see a little bit what I've learned and what we've done in those areas. So Erin, if you don't mind, you can move the slide. The engagement work looks like, again, over the last 6 months, going around and having lots of conversations, going to lunches, talking to students, talking to heads of school, principals, etc. The methodology, where really I just had 3 questions for everybody that I met with. And they were pretty simple. What are 2 things that you're really proud of around diversity, equity, inclusion in your school or in your space? What's some of the good work? Because we don't all know what that is. I would love to learn about that. And then also, what are 2 examples of things that are kind of keeping you up at night? What are the inequities that are most troubling you? And then what are your hopes and dreams going forward? How can I in this Office of Equity support you to get there? Erin, you can keep going. Thank you. Some early wins. I'm not going to go through all of these, but there were quite a few that we were pretty proud of over the last 6 months. I'll highlight SEED, and I think I've talked about SEED before, but SEED stands for Seeking Educational Equity and Diversity. It's SEED leaders and SEED seminars and communities partner to develop leaders who guide our peers in conversational communities that drive personal, institutional, and societal change toward social justice. And so with the help of the BEF and the help of the MECO program, and just what we had in OTL, we were able to support 12 educators to get SEED trained over the summer. And that means that we're running 7 seminars across the district this year, and they are amazing. I'm pretty proud of our menu of professional learning. That's the bottom bullet there. We have a very robust equity professional learning menu. There are 2 to 3 offerings for educators district-wide a week. And so we're pretty proud of that. And yeah, I could say something about MPDE. I'll mention this too. It's the second bullet. That's the Massachusetts Partnership for Diversity in Education. Dr. Guillory mentioned that we do have an Educator of Color networking night next Wednesday. And we've been partnering with MPDE to just think a lot about how to best recruit diverse educators. That group is working with our own Brookline Educators for Educator Diversity team, the BEAD team, which is an amazing group of educators. And thank you, Stephen, for being a part of that group that's working really, really hard to make a difference in our diversifying our staff. Thanks, Erin. So some of my findings, impressions, observations, this was just some stuff that I threw here just so that people could see it and represent in a different way. This isn't everything that's going on. Here again, I'll highlight a couple of things. The CARE Parent Coalition, which is amazing. We have representatives, parent representatives from every K-8 school and the high school. And CARE stands for the Coalition for Anti-Racist Education. We've got BRAVE, which is led by, I think Rowan Raudebush is a senior, and Rohan Simon, sometimes I have trouble saying his name. BRAVE is a group of students who are leading the way with leaders in racial justice work at BHS, and they're pulling representatives from various activism groups and parent leaders and administrators to reform subgroups to sort of coalesce a lot of the work that's happening in the district around equity. Thank you, Erin. So the next slide is really just, again, to sort of show what are the findings. And I'll let folks just kind of take a look at this slide. I'm not going to speak about every single piece here, but I will say some strengths are absolutely, we have an amazingly engaged faculty and staff, an amazing, again, parent community and parent support, very involved. And we've just got brilliant commitment to this work and to supporting our students. In terms of some of the barriers, we don't quite have a coherent model yet. Again, and this is what I spoke about with BRAVE. There's lots of different efforts afoot, but not sort of a coordinating of those efforts. So we lack coherence for sure. We, as educators and community members, need significant training, considerable training in cultural competence. And our school schedules in many ways are not set up, the structural model is not set up to provide space for DEI work. Our educators are very often, and rightly, in front of students. And so thinking about how we can leverage the time that educators can come together to do some of that work that I've already mentioned is something that is certainly a barrier. Erin, if you'd advance that slide, please. Thank you. A few other pieces here that I will highlight. I'm looking in the left column, the deficit thinking. We don't always cultivate genius. I'm thinking about Goldie Muhammad's cultivating genius in terms of our marginalized students. We don't always cultivate their genius and sometimes work from a deficit model. And this is something that I have seen. Again, we have a fear of loss and behavior change. There is dissatisfaction. If you look at that bottom bullet on the left, on the bottom left, dissatisfaction with what we've done around belonging culture and how we respond to bias incidents. It seems as if we're sort of reacting more than being proactive, and that's something that I've certainly heard. A couple of other things here. Our educators are busy doing equity learning work, and yet we don't always make our learning visible to our students. We don't always make our learning visible to our parents, our families. And the same is true for the learning work around equity that's not educator-based. It's just sort of all of us. And so how can we do a better job sort of making that visible? I also wrote toward the bottom here that PSB is inequitable by design. And what I mean by that is literally that inequitable outcomes happen because our schools were historically designed to underdevelop the cognitive information processing skills of diverse students. And so consequently, that's eroding their confidence as intellectuals, and oppression itself lives in policy. So those are some of the findings. Thank you, Erin. I wanted to represent this slide, just represent some of what I heard in my meetings with students, and quite frankly, in my meetings with some adults as well. I really feel like Azavia Barsky-Elnor on January 6th did a great job when she spoke to the school committee, just to sort of represent the myriad microaggressions. People often say that microaggressions are like a 1,000 silent deaths or cuts. And so this is what I heard a lot of, and what we're doing with educators is really defining, what do we even mean by micro insult? What do we mean by code switching, which happens all the time, or learned helplessness, imposter syndrome, stereotype threat, et cetera, et cetera. The books that you see represented on this slide are texts that several schools are taking up reading as we speak. And some of these texts definitely speak to some of these pieces that our students are experiencing. I will just say here that we can safely bet that contending with each of these pieces, and this is not an exhaustive list, all potentially all at the same time, doesn't generate a lot of happy feelings for marginalized individuals. And instead, one might feel guarded, untrusting, and maybe even a little bit hostile. Thanks, Erin. So our system and our self and system goals, how do we grow educational leaders who can strive for equity, now that I've sort of talked about these findings? So equity of educational opportunity and culturally responsive practices, so that we're promoting each student's success and well-being. Well, for me and for us, it's back to that equity specific professional learning, and then measuring that learning. So I've got a slide here by Trisha I always say her name wrong, Barvia, that's how you say it, who says, when we think about teaching and professional learning, educators who want to change the world, you cannot disrupt systems of oppression until you understand how systems of oppression work. And that's where we're starting. And by the way, you cannot understand how they work until you understand how systems of oppression have worked on you. So as we continue in the deck, thanks, Erin, part of what we're doing with the teaching and professional learning piece, you've already seen this, but we're looking at, if you look at the top here, what does it look like to work on this spectrum from a personal level? So the first row is about personal competencies and our ability to tell intersectional pieces about ourselves and to others. We see in that storytelling how we've internalized oppression. Ethos, which you see at the bottom, is it's all about the culture that we're building around us to create partnership. And then taxonomy is all about what we're learning. So Erin, if you'll advance the slide. Another way that we're tackling the professional learning, Erin, if you don't mind just changing that slide. When we want to change a system, we should have a personal way that we're moving. And so the taxonomy that we're looking at as we embark upon the professional learning is this taxonomy of disruption. And there's two sort of sections here. And so if you take a look, you'll see that the 4 I's of oppression, which I haven't talked about, won't talk about today, but they're all in the background. They're the purple. In the front are the 4 skills that contribute to our practice change. And you see storytelling there. That's part of what we're beginning to do. And this, we're continuously working on these skills. In the right-hand section here where it says advancing anti-racism, you'll notice that the practice is mindset first. So there's 2 levels here, the mindset change, what are we thinking? How is the storytelling affecting how we're feeling, et cetera. And then ultimately we move to that behavior change. And that's sort of the being and the doing differently. Thanks, Erin. This slide is just an example of, again, some of the work that's happening with educators. That top line, again, still focusing on diversity, right? So the important thing about diversity skills is your ability to increase your awareness of who you are over time. So if you take a look at some of those questions and pieces there, you'll see some of the ways in which we're embarking on the work. Erin, you can advance that slide. So I'm showing you a list, and it's not for nothing. This is a list of everything that we're working on in the public schools of Brookline. And this is what diversity in action looks like. We cannot graduate to belonging until we complete this list. And so I want to say a couple quick things about this. We're getting close to the end. So again, a diversity, I like to think of diversity as we're a culture where we build a culture that cultures. And so this is the pre-work to equity. It's the work we do to make every single person feel seen in whatever level of difference exists in our district. It's that totality. So diversity's goal is to build empathy, like I've already said, and having a strategy. Our work, as you read through some of those bullets, is about having a strategy for everyone that shows up in DESE, in our DESE demographic data. And our answer should be how we are planning to see them. And again, those bullets kind of help us go through that. So we need to be planning strategies, for example, for our English language learners. We need to be planning strategies for our 3s and 4s, for our students with 504s. We need to be planning strategies for our students with IEPs. We need to be planning strategies for our neurodiverse learners, our students who are first generation, and our students who are economically disadvantaged, because again, oppression is deeper than racism. So I just want you to kind of take a look through that. We're not going to spend a ton of time there, but this is some of the work that we're working on. And until we have all of these completed, we're not really okay to move on or graduate to belonging. And Erin, if you don't mind changing that slide. We've got to complete diversity first. Here's some belonging. I just want to say that belonging is not just about feelings, it's about the data. And so again, things like our equity audits, our panorama survey data, et cetera. While I say that, I should say that students and adults' feelings have to change before test scores change. And that's why we're starting there. We're continuously measuring change because belonging improves academic outcomes over time. Thanks, Erin. So the PD that's happening around belonging, you can keep going, Erin, thank you. We are doing some work around our PSB culture of belonging. And the slide just gives us a little bit of a look at what we're working on here. Then, so Paul Gorski, as we're again getting close to the end, is someone who is such a great leader in this work and someone I subscribe to quite a lot. I won't read the slide to you, but he also says that if we're not clearly seeing the dynamics, we're not going to be able to respond to them effectively. And so a lot of what we're doing is making clear what those dynamics are. He also talks about diversity and how celebrating it's not enough. And there's a lot more that we need to do. So with Gorski being a leader for our leadership team, you can advance the slide. Thank you, Erin. Senior staff, and in some work with principals in the system, we're looking at the guidelines, and these are Gorski's guidelines. And again, I'm not going to read them all, just highlight a couple. But if you look at guideline number 2, for example, he asks, do we mitigate or transform? Are our equity efforts a threat to the existence of inequity, or do they merely mitigate the symptoms of inequity? If it's the latter, we need to start over. If you want to advance the slide, Erin, I'd love to talk really quickly about guideline 3 and 4. He says, are we dancing around or digging in? So are equity efforts contributing to the permanent, and that's the work that we want to do, redistribution of access and opportunity, or leaving the current distribution in place and helping marginalized people be more comfortable as marginalized people? If it's the latter, we need to start over. Sorry, Erin, if you just go back one more time. Thank you. And then just guideline 4, who are the experts? Are our equity efforts based on collaborations with marginalized people? I'm still thinking about Azavia's comments, deferring to their expertise, or are we working with historically excluded people or on historically excluded people? And if it's the latter, we need to start over. Thanks, Erin. So how do we measure equity? There's so many ways, and sometimes people think that we can't do that, but we know the powerful research on effective ways to measure equity, and I'm just giving one example here from the UNESCO Institute for Statistics. They've come up with 5, and lots of folks like to use these measures for equity, something that we're thinking a lot about. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I will say, and I bolded this bottom piece, just to get a sense of what my role is and how I'm seeing it as we move forward through the spring and into next year, in partnership with our central office departments and so many others in PSB. My role as the Senior Director of Educational Equity is to craft system-wide reform efforts that address academic expectations, access to learning opportunities, high quality instruction, resource allocation, and accountability to achieve educational equity. And we do have access and facility around these strategies and resources, which will in fact help us to improve the quality of instruction and academic expectations in the classroom. That's it. So I think what the other pieces that I'll just say here, just to sort of end, and I will mention, just as I think about that last slide, I'm obviously one person and I can't do those pieces that I just mentioned alone. And this is work for all of us. But this gives you a little bit of a sense of what we're looking at and what this office is working toward. So this is a roadmap. I mentioned the roadmap in the opening. And this is sort of what we're thinking about for the first 4 years, planning for impact. And again, some of these pieces we are in fact doing. I'm not going to go over every bullet, obviously, but give you a moment to kind of look through and see in terms of diversity. This is what, again, the check marks, these are the things that we want to make sure we're having happen. And we're continually working on that. There's belonging there. By the way, I'll mention that CRT at the bottom, I probably should have spelled that out, is culturally responsive teaching or culturally responsive pedagogy, not critical race theory. And then some of the pieces for inclusion. Will you advance the slide? Planning for impact for years 5+. Still working on belonging, constantly doing that. We know that we're emerging, or we're getting toward completed when, things like our data is alive and well, and we're using those panorama surveys and our culture and climate surveys to ensure the belonging of students and family and staff, and that's increasing over time, et cetera. And there's some pieces there on inclusion as well. You see a mention of the 4 eyes of oppression, that second to last bullet. And I will say that again, some of our building leaders and others are doing this, and we're taking stock and looking at where we need to be. Thanks, Erin. accountability is kind of the last piece here. How do we hold ourselves accountable for this work? Well, I'm thinking about it in a lot of different ways. We want to measure our progress vertically and laterally and reciprocally. That's what we're thinking about. There's a little piece here on equity audits, which I believe Leslie Ryan Miller spoke about, that's happening in social studies and in special education. So we're doing these kinds of things, but we are continually looking at offering choice and non-negotiable professional learning opportunities to continue to build that foundation of awareness. Thanks, Erin. Last thing, folks have mentioned the strategic plan, and I just want to say that as the district works toward this, my final comment on what the Office of Equity is doing is this: in collaboration with central office departments and PSB educators, the Office of Equity will create and implement a long-term plan within the district's strategic plan that infuses an aligned equity agenda throughout every district-wide effort. And you've seen a little bit of that roadmap in the previous couple of slides, and we're looking forward to really fleshing that out even further with the rollout of the strategic plan in the early fall. And I just have one last slide, and then I'm happy to take questions. I know I gave you a lot. I always end my slide decks with Audre Lorde, who is my inspiration and muse, and thought I would end this for you all with this. What I most regretted in my life were my silences. My silences had not protected me. Your silences will not protect you. We can learn to work and speak when we are afraid. That's it. So thank you, Erin. Thanks, everybody. I'm happy to take questions. Thanks,
Yes.
Mariah.
Yeah. So Janae, I just want to say thank you so much. My goodness, there's so much there. Just to remind folks that we received copies of the presentation. It's in our folder for the school committee members. And Robin, they're available to the public, are they? The presentation?
Yes, it's been posted on the website.
We'll post it on the website. So I just want to give people that opportunity because there was so much there to go over again and think about. I think I saw Mariah. Did you have your hand up? And then Stephen, so Mariah.
Oh, Janae, I want to start by just saying, wow, like this is exciting. And I wrote down way too many notes that I want to say things about. So I'm going to do my best. I know Suzanne doesn't want me to blabber on, but I'm going to actually blabber for a minute. And I'm going to apologize in advance, but I have I was just processing a lot during that. And I'm just so excited. The things that you said about equity, in particular about your definition of equity, and thinking about and what you said, which is PSB is not a system, an equitable system. I don't have your word exactly right, but that is painfully acute. Something that I think that maybe recently we are more and more. I hope, and I hold myself accountable, and I hope that the entire school committee holds itself accountable to honor that truth and act accordingly, and act in a timely fashion, act with urgency to how we're going to respond and support your work and support the students and the staff who are doing this work and implementing it across the system, and living this, and hopefully feeling more comfortable to be able to really speak up and to feel the comfort that they have when things aren't being done in a way that meets them. I was recently asked over the Martin Luther King holiday to reflect on a speech by Martin Luther King that was particularly meaningful to me. And just thinking about your ending quote, and the quote that or the speech that most meant something to me that I spoke about was Letter from Birmingham Jail, and the role of the white moderate, right? And the white moderate is saying, wait. And we cannot wait, right? We need to be thinking about how we can, and I just want to emphasize this, the urgency in your work, and how we cannot stand by and allow legacy systems to stay in place where they have no place in our current world, in our understanding of what students need, and of what students who have been treated inequitably for generations, what students and their parents have experienced, and so on and so forth. So I'm like super worked up about this. I was crying during an early part of your presentation. I had to turn off the camera to get myself a little bit more composed. A couple things that I want to reflect on. You said that resources is a strength of the district. I think resources overall is a strength of the district. Resources where it comes to equity is not a strength of the district. You alluded to that at the end, where you said that that you are a staff of one, and we need to be thinking about how we are actually shuffling the deck. We are not going to be living by the ways that we thought about that as we think about, and I hope that this comes through, Linus, in your strategic plan as well, emphasizing how we are spending our resources to build equity from the bottom up, to rethink our systems in a way that we can truly support students. And I would just note that we talked about some of this last week or maybe it's 2 weeks ago at the Finance Subcommittee, and we talked about, for example, in our structure of fees for next year, what we can be doing to think about how fees themselves are reconsidered of who needs to be thinking about paying fees. How do we eliminate barriers in terms of applications? Because some of these things are just the application itself is a barrier, and thinking about through all of these issues. And this is going to also require resources and investment, and it's a necessary investment. And I am fully in support of how we can make that happen. On your last slide, you talked about who's going to do the work, and you talked about PSB staff and others. And I hope that on the next version of that slide, you present the school committee along with you as a partner in this work, because I want to support that and help you and actively be a participant in that. And I hope that, this is my last comment, I promise, Suzanne, that we can think about having, whether it's a subcommittee or a working group or again, thinking about some of the conversation we had about how to accelerate our environmental goals. How do we apply that to our equity work at the school committee level, and help focus on this and provide the support that you need from the school committee side and the political side as well to advance that. Thinking about if we can, as you're developing your action plan, be a part of some sort of a summit, be participants in that, whether it's a subcommittee, what makes sense. I'd love to have that conversation as well. And and then one last comment, I'm so sorry, I'm rattling on, but you talked about DEI and belonging. And in some of my work recently, because I work on some of this at work as well, we're talking about justice. So the JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And it would be great to see how we can bring elements of justice as well into your work, and thinking about justice throughout, and then all the intersectional justice that relates to. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can I just say, I love the idea of your idea about a summit or subcommittee or something like that. I do think that everything you say about the urgency and what Dr. King said in the letter from Birmingham Jail, why we can't wait. And also sometimes in our urgency, we cause harm because we don't really have all the pieces that we need just yet. And so it's a balance of being urgent, but also going slow to make sure that we're doing some of those first pieces, if that makes sense. But I love what you said about school committee being a part of this, and I'm certainly committed to that and would love to talk more about that idea. So thanks.
Thank you, Mariah. Stephen, did you have your hand up?
Thanks, Suzanne. Thanks, Janae, for such a comprehensive presentation. I have 3 pretty short comments. One, I'm glad to see that in Dr. Guillory's budget request, there's an expansion of your office from you to 2.5 people. That's a budget request that I'm strongly supportive of. Just want to state that. The second point is that I was also glad to see at the end of your presentation a brief discussion of 3 dimensions of accountability. So my main takeaway from Azavia's presentation in January was a call for accountability, and that just supporting the Office of Educational Equity was insufficient to move the needle on equity, particularly racial equity. I want to ask you, I'm not going to ask you what you think the appropriate metrics for advancing in equity are right now. I'm interested in what you think a good process or entity would be for making those determinations. Is that your office itself as part of a plan that would be folded into Dr. Guillory's strategic plan? Do you think that should be an independent body? Is there another option that you would recommend to us? And then I'll have one quick thing to say after that.
Stephen, can you say one more time what?
Yeah.
Sorry. What's...
So you talk about you and Azavia both. Azavia really emphasized, and you brought up the topic of accountability. Mm-hmm. My question is, by what indicators should we be looking to measure ourselves? Yeah. So that seems like a huge discussion, and I don't want to get into the merits of MCAS as a that seems like another few hours worth of conversation at least. But rather, what's the right way to determine those metrics is my question for you.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. There are some 18 indicators of equity that we could use to sort of measure and judge and hold ourselves accountable that I've studied. And I feel I'm not even sure if I want to commit to an answer, just to say that part of the reason that we have been investigating and looking at expanding the office is because that's work that I would love to do, but I don't have the time to do that. And when we talk about really working on, reversing inequities, disrupting inequities, and institutional racism, systemic inequities, et cetera, we need devoted and dedicated time to sort of focus on collecting that data, getting that information. The PDs that we do, it's a funny thing about PD, of course, is like or teaching, right? You hope that people have learned what you taught them, but you don't necessarily know that for sure until you see them doing it and then practicing it and going back. And so there's a lot there in terms of what that measurement looks like. I think that this office could take that on with some, and being wise, obviously, about how we use money in the office, but we're just not there yet. And I will not even pretend that I have been able to do that this year yet.
Okay, but that potentially is something that your office could take on with sufficient resourcing.
I think so, yeah.
Okay, that's great to hear. And then just briefly, I just want to comment on what Mariah just said about a potential subcommittee, and just to state that I would be very supportive also of a subcommittee to work with your office, specifically to work with you on your proposals and also to give you an opportunity to present more broadly. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Janae. Thank you, Janae, for that presentation. It's I'm still absorbing so much of it, but you are an office of one, and I had some questions on the methodology of who you're speaking to. Mm-hmm. In terms of, right, we talked about ELL, race, we talked about income, we talked about students with IEPs and 504s. Mm-hmm. That is a lot of work. And so, those 18 indicators of equity, do they address all of those areas? And sorry, this is a multi-part question. How would you think about interacting with OSS and other departments, METCO and other offices in terms of steps and others in terms of how to really get at the heart of the work? And then my comment is that I'm also supportive of a subcommittee and some sort of summit that comes with sort of directives on the town side and the school side.
Thanks, Val. I would say currently, to answer your question, it's been a little scattershot. And so you mentioned the methodology. I had opportunities to go to sort of the lunch groups of the METCO students in the K-8s and all the METCO advisors multiple times to just sit and talk with our students in the METCO programs and the students in that program in the schools. One-on-ones with teachers. I did a lot of work over the summer just to go and visit with principals and small groups that were doing sort of summer work. And so that's kind of been my process. I think it's amazing to be on the 5th floor with Casey No Miller and Leslie Ryan Miller. Everybody's running a million miles, but we do our best to try to have meetings together, and obviously Aaron Cooley and Ty Fluker as well, and Sam. We try to come together to sort of touch on these pieces. Equity cuts across all of our departments, but again, there's only so much time in a day, and there are things that come up, and so it doesn't look the way it should yet. And my hope would be to have a more that's same piece that I talked about earlier about having a coordinated sort of approach that does not exist yet. So I'd love a little time to think about what that could look like. I haven't had that time yet, but that's obviously a goal.
Right. I mean, when we think about it, there are some students who hit 3, 4, or 5 of those ceilings that you mentioned. So how to think about that layering too, and those barriers that are even more compounded in someone's experience.
Absolutely. And I know Mariah mentioned this intersectionality. It's a big piece, right? Our students who are overrepresented in special ed who identify as African American or Black, they're contending with a few things there, and many other examples, right? And so how are we really seeing and valuing those students, those educators? That's part of the diversity and the belonging work that we need to do. Thank you, Val.
Thank you.
Thank you, Val. Susan?
Like everyone else, I'm grateful. I have many things sparking in my mind. I guess the two things I would convey are, number one, while it's certainly a long journey, I think there are probably, as you've already done with kind of identifying early wins, there's probably a handful of things that are maybe have a quicker timeline too, and it just sort of helping us keep that present in mind so that people don't think, oh, inclusion isn't going to happen for 5 more years. We're doing inclusion now, and so I think just sort of helping identify where are the places where even now some of those investments are sort of achieving goals. Because I guess I don't think about you as a person of one, even though you are. I feel like we have a $130 million budget to be putting this against. And if we don't take a racial equity lens and a anti-bias, anti-hate lens with the entire 130 million or 24, whatever we have, then we're kind of missing the point. Because I think while the power of what you can do is sort of pull it all together into kind of some kind of coherence, it really is sort of everyone's work to do, and every budget line item, every budget manager's work to do. And it's not only kind of curriculum and teacher PD. There are all these other places where inequity shows up, like policy, like in our capital projects, like, many things. So all of which is to say that I just think that there's not getting overwhelmed, but I guess I don't take anything off the table when I would think about an equity lens and the resources that are at your disposal. And I would hope we're taking an equity lens with the entire budget, not just your office.
Absolutely. I agree. I think it's so important. And I do think that it's ongoing work, right? It's life work. I've had people in schools say to me, we did implicit bias 3 years ago. We're good. Like, no, you're not. And so I hear you that there are some things that we have done and we're doing them, right? It's ongoing, absolutely ongoing work. And it is all of our work for sure.
I just think that there are places in the curriculum like Facing History, like the ADL project, like the Warrior, like what Warriors are doing. I mean, all kinds of places where money is getting spent on anti-hate, anti-bias things, LGBTQ stuff. So I guess I would just say pulling all those pieces together into coherence. Not that you are responsible for all of it, but that everybody sees the part that they need to play. So thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Andy?
Yeah, so thank you, Janae, for the inspiring presentation and the inspiring work behind it. Yeah, I think maybe the phrase that Mariah was searching for earlier, you said, Janae, that in your travels through the district, you had come across some aspects of PSB that were inequitable by design, right? And so not just through inattention or neglect, but actually by design. I'm wondering, like, can you give us some more concrete sense of what that means? Like, what are examples of this in PSB?
Yeah, I think it's the inequity. It's sort of like I'd mentioned, sort of that oppression kind of lives in policy, right? And so what we see is there. oh gosh, I'm trying to think of some examples. We look at, I sometimes use the example of our students, our METCO students, or our students of color who would be very well served if they could stay after school and meet with a teacher, but the METCO bus and different just challenges with getting where they need to get, getting home, getting wherever they need to get, or they want to be in a sport, but different things like that. Some of those logistical challenges and things that I see, I think you can take it as far back as and we had such a beautiful presentation by the BEEP leaders, but sometimes I think that when we've got students of color who it seems as if the skill gaps that they're experiencing, and sometimes a belief with that deficit thinking that, oh, the parents are busy working, so they're not getting read to as much at home, and so let's do a little bit of over scaffolding here. Let's do some hand holding. We feel badly that our Black and brown students, as an example, don't always score as well. So we'll over scaffold. We'll do these different things, and there's a lot that's within all of that too. The stereotypes that sort of occur. But what happens is, back to that piece that I mentioned about sort of the eroding of the confidence, and again, just this piece that within equity by design, it's sort of the brick and mortar of how schools were built. And I think there was a point where we're like, oh, we're going to try to fix what we got wrong. But the truth is we kind of started out wrong. And I won't go off in a philosophical sort of thing there, but yeah, I've just seen a number of different places where it feels like the way we've set up some of our systems and the way that's landing and showing up on kids, it was inequitable, literally in its design, in its genesis. And so we're trying to walk that all the way back and start fresh. So.
Yeah, I'm thinking even, Janae, when Xavier spoke a couple of weeks ago and she talked about how she needed, I don't know if she needed permission or encouragement to sign up for an honors math. And she was actually, in some sense, discouraged. And it seems to me that's a part of a system that is designed not to promote equal access for everybody.
Well, yeah, and it's a conversation we're having in OTL and throughout the district, right, about our course recommendations, right, and our leveling system and what that looks like. And Dr. Guillory's had some really powerful thoughts on it. And so, yes, that's one of many examples you could argue, at least, and I'm not even suggesting that fundamentally levels are wrong, but the ways in which we've gone about these in some cases have absolutely disadvantaged certain sectors of our student body.
Yeah. All right.
I just wanted to give one smaller example of something that's not about people, but really is about systems, and it goes back to BEEP too. The BEEP enrollment process is you apply, and currently the way it works is there's a lottery, and then they address financial aid. But if we were to flip that and to make it that the children who need BEEP, have a financial need to go to BEEP that we can address, are first admitted, and then we fill the other slots, that would allow for children who might not otherwise go to preschool to be able to attend. And so this is a systemic thing. It's not that someone has made a specific choice about a specific child, but it is something that through a policy, it could be corrected.
That's a great example.
David.
Thank you very much, Janae, for your presentation. It was quite enlightening and thought-provoking. You mentioned as a barrier, lack of time. And as we know, time is a finite resource in a limited school day. To what extent do you think DEI work can be incorporated into the curriculum, into extracurricular activities, into student experiences?
I think that it can be and is being in to some degree. I think that we can be even more creative, but SEED is another example that I had sort of mentioned before, where, we educators attend 2 to 3 hours of SEED a month on their own time. We have again, we're paying the facilitators to do that. And there's an option for grad credit, for example, with C, you can get grad credits or, PDPs, et cetera. So there's some incentivizing there, but it's interesting that you mention it because Leslie Ryan Miller and Malcolm Cawthorn from BHS and I and Michelle Herman had a conversation just a couple days ago about what it would look like to find a way to be able to do some seed work during the school day. It's not an easy solve because you're right, you've got the start and end of the school day, but we're thinking about that and trying to explore some of those pieces. There's a lot around what educators are opting to do, what they want to do, how they're identifying where they are. We're doing professional learning during equity professional learning during faculty meetings. I promise you, my Tuesdays are completely booked out. So even without me, schools are doing their work during the school day and during their faculty meeting time. But it's still a sort of situation where we're trying to find those areas so that we can do something that feels more sustained, and we can pick up on some of that momentum. In terms of students, it's a really good question. I'm still getting a handle on all the ways in which we've got students doing their own equity learning work, their own DEI work, whether it's via our GSAs or our Young Scholars Program or several groups at the high school. There's, I think Susan mentioned Warriors for Change. There's definitely groups that are doing some of this work. Again, trying to think about how to coalesce with many, many students and many faculty members, how we can sort of move together, if you will. But yeah, some of it's happening and more of it could be happening.
So, Janae, I think I can say, speaking for the committee, that we are very much committed to doing the work with you. I'm not exactly sure how it's going to look. I do know there are several members who have already spoken to me about doing a summit, doing a subcommittee, doing a task force. So I would look forward to working with you and the school committee members on this work. I think it's work that needs to be done, and it's time to do it. Stephen, did you want to say something?
Yeah, really briefly. I just want to make one more comment about a possible subcommittee. It just seems to me, Janae, that your office is the one without a school committee counterpart. All the other offices in central administration do have a subcommittee that liaises with them regularly. And Dr. Guillory, just to put you on the spot for a second, I know we discussed this briefly, and I don't want to push something forward before you have the staff to really achieve what you intend to achieve, before you have your vision fully elaborated. I don't want to start trying to hold you accountable for something that you haven't even begun yet. But I wonder if you have any guidance for us now, Dr. Guillory, on what entity you think might be advisable for the school committee to stand up or to support to best work with the Office of Educational Equity.
So, I mean, a great question, and again, great conversation that we've had tonight. My mind is and Janae has shared the presentation with me, and we've walked through it. And each time I hear it, I glean new insights and matching things with other observations that I hope to be able to do as well of a job that she's done with her report of entry findings with sort of my district level report of entry findings. There are many, I think, threads that we can pull on, but I think getting that alignment or the direction. So one of the things we really want to focus on, or we've had preliminary conversations around, is really looking at it from the student voice. And so there's a delicate balance of the adults overly leading what the student experience is. And so that's where I would like to be able to leverage the student voice and the student experience and shaping this, and the adults then become the hands or the supportive arms that support them through this work. So we've talked in that about having Brookline be the leader for some summits. And so we've had some ideas around that, some student-based summits, starting that level of conversation, and certainly what are the adult supports that need to be in there, whether that's some form of a panel, a working group, or possibly even a committee subgroup. So I'm open to those types of things, but I really want to be intentional about the work that we've already identified, but then also what are the lived experiences that our students need right now also. So finding that healthy balance.
Thanks. Thanks.
So thank you so much, Janae, for this. My goodness, you have jumped in completely, wholeheartedly, 150%. Thank you so very much for that. I think we'll conclude this for now, but this is only the beginning of the conversation. So thank you for that. So we're going to move on. You're welcome to stay as long as you want, Janae, but you're also welcome to call it a night. We're moving on to the policies. David, did you have some presentations or something you want to do?
I do, yes, just briefly. So first up, we have a second reading of the Public Schools of Brookline pesticide policy. At our last discussion on this as a full committee, there was a suggestion that we remove the term economically unfeasible from the policy draft. That appears in 2 locations. It was also mentioned that we really ought to receive some concrete response from the DPW about any concerns that they may have with our draft. The DPW has reached out to me and to district staff saying that they will have a more formal response to our policy in the coming days. I still have not received that response. So it would be my recommendation that we defer a vote until a future meeting so that we can allow at least a little more time for the DPW to provide some input. What I can say is that Matt Gillis has informed me that of the 2 particular pesticides that we mention for prohibition in the absence of extenuating circumstances, one of them is not used at all, and the other one is occasionally used to treat poison ivy. And as previously mentioned, there is an interest into looking at alternatives for how to treat poison ivy. We don't yet have a firm response on that at this time. Do any of you have any thoughts you'd like to add on the pesticide policy?
Mariah?
I just want to reiterate the thing I said last time, which didn't come through in your comments now, which is thinking about pesticides in relation to food. And that's not here in the draft either.
Yes, and there actually is interest from some high school students in incorporating, not necessarily in this policy, but somewhere being more detailed about the toxins and other pesticides that might be in foods that we serve.
I would certainly be in support of banning or limiting any pesticides in our food. So if that's an additional policy, that may be where we need to go.
Excuse me, are we talking about only serving organic food? Is that what you're suggesting? Because I'm not clear. Is that?
Well, I think we have to take a look at it and see what those policies might look like. I don't think we've done any work on that yet, have we?
So usually the wellness committee is charged with the responsibility of reviewing anything that is food related every 3 years. And so that's work that's going to be undertaken shortly. It is a lot more complex than just being able to commit to organic only right away, because we do receive certain subsidies from the federal government, and they have their own regulations that we want to make sure we're not contravening, because that can have a very significant financial impact, and not just financial, but in terms of our students and who might be eligible for certain discounted lunches, et cetera. So I do think that one is going to require a lot more thought and consideration. The way I had envisioned the pesticide policy was to focus more on pesticides that are being applied to school grounds and within the school. And I would rather treat food separately because of those complications with federal law. I do think, though, it's certainly a worthy topic, and it's something that really ought to be docketed, and hopefully we can get the Wellness Committee to reconvene shortly.
When I brought it up, Helen, I think it's more subtle than just a binary, it's all organic or it's not organic, in the same way that the policy that David has isn't we are banning them completely, nor is it we're permitting them. But especially as like environmental health, people will tell us about different foods and sort of the bioavailability of different pesticides in different foods. And we hear about the dirty dozen in terms of fruits, which are particularly bear particularly high levels of pesticides. So I'd like, and I'm not an expert, but I would like experts to help make sure that we are at least that conversation is being framed within the best science for the best outcomes around health relating to pesticides.
Stephen?
Just briefly, David, thanks for checking in with Matt Gillis on this. Did he say that there was a readily available alternative to what we're using right now on poison ivy? I mean, does he foresee any problems in his office as a result of this policy?
He didn't provide a direct answer to that question, but he implied that there are other paths that could be pursued for treating poison ivy, and that the DPW is looking into it.
You can pull it by the roots and then you get rid of it.
You can do that.
Have those gloves on. Okay, David, you want to move to the second one?
Yes, so the second one is the replacement of headmaster terminology with head of schools in all of our existing public schools of Brookline policies. I think that one is as close to a no-brainer as it ever gets. So it was just a technicality that we needed to have a second reading on. So I would be prepared to move that we vote on that replacement.
Do I have a second? Thank you, Steve.
Can I make
Ellen?
one comment? I'm going to vote for it, but I really don't understand why we didn't use principal instead of head of school. Principal just, I mean, it's really awkward to talk about a head of school as opposed to a principal. But
Actually, I'm with you, Helen, on that. I think it should be principal as well, though I will vote for this. But I think, Linus, you had some thoughts about that, right? You talked to other folks or something.
Yeah, we've shared that just in the context of our complex high school, multiple buildings, multiple facilities over there. It's a large school, and that's somewhat consistent with other big schools in the state. Certainly a New England thing as a high
New
school.
England thing.
High
It's
school
not a
principal.
Midwest thing. It's not a South.
Absolutely. In New York and Texas, building principal, but I encountered that up here. And so I think it's a signal to the honor and the esteem that we allocate to that position.
Believe me, I value our head of school immensely, but it's awkward. That's all.
So let's take a vote, unless there's any other thought. David?
Yes.
Stephen?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
Helen?
Yes.
Val?
Yes.
Mariah?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. Thank you, David, for that. We're moving on
Madam
to.
Chair, if I could jump in just for a second here.
Sure, go right ahead, Dr. Guillory.
I'd just like to say, as I shared with you all earlier, Aaron and I have been in constant communication here through the meeting. And with consultation with DPW, we are going to recommend closure for tomorrow, given the conditions, the number of districts around us, systems that are closed. It's going to greatly impact our ability. Well, the weather itself is going to impact our ability to actually get in, but then the staffing that we need to run the building. So at this point, I'm making that recommendation and decision.
Can I just say on that, Dr. Guillory, that I really appreciate that you take the time to do this and to try to keep the schools open for as long as you can. I know there's been conversation in the district about why can't we have as early a closure call as possible. I think your orientation of trying as hard as you can to keep the district open is one that I fully support. So thanks for thanks for taking the position you have.
Yeah, thank you for letting us know. Thank you. I know it's a hard call. Okay, any subcommittee and liaison reports? Helen?
I just wanted to let the committee know that the Pierce School project went to the Facilities Assessment, FAS, Facilities Assessment
Subcommittee.
Help me?
Subcommittee.
Thank you. Subcommittee at the MSBA for the Pierce School, where they basically go over our education plan, the plans that we have for the building, the initial plans, and make comments. And the meeting actually went quite well. They were very pleased with our educational plan and how the building mirrored the needs of that educational plan. And their questions were good questions, and they were pretty impressed with how complex a building this is and how we're dealing with it. So the next point will be on March 2nd when we go to the board meeting, at which point they'll vote, hopefully, to move us on into schematic design.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Helen and Andy, for all that work on Pierce. Andy.
Yeah, I can give a very brief update on negotiations. So recall that the school committee had petitioned for mediation to help us reach agreements with the units A and B of the BEU. So in response, the Department of Labor Relations has now assigned a mediator to work with the parties. And we've now got mediation sessions scheduled for March 4th and March 25th. Those dates have just been confirmed. So that's moving along.
Good work.
Thank you, Andy.
What were the dates, Andy?
Oh, March 4th and March 25th.
Yeah.
Those are confirmed, Andy?
They have been confirmed by the mediator and by the BEU.
Thank you. Val.
School Building Committee is meeting tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. We'll be going over budget review, construction update, as well as traffic plans. The link is up on the town website for anybody who wants to join, 9 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. tomorrow.
I have to say that is one big muddy hole right now. It's impressive. I walk by many times a week and it's impressive. Anyone else? Mariah.
I have a report on the accounts payable warrant. Since the last time I reported to you all, I've approved $792,790.48 of bills. Unlike last time where I had an exciting update about some of the Medicaid reimbursements, there was very uneventful bills over the past 2 weeks. It sounds like a lot of money, but it was a vast quantity of mostly food and which is exciting, food and school supplies for the most part.
Thank you, Mariah. Anyone else? Stephen.
I guess related to our earlier conversation today, as the MEDCO liaison, I spent Thursday shadowing the head of the program and spending some time in each of the rooms in BHS, FR, and FRR. And the main takeaway that I want to share with you is how valuable those rooms are to the MEDCO students. The level of comfort they clearly demonstrated in that room was apparent to me, and it was I think it's a real testament to the program how useful the MEDCO students find those rooms. I just want to also say that as part of that visit, we went to the Martin Trust Center for Early Childhood Education near Stop and Shop that is advised. It's got an all-star team operating it, and it was just a really impressive facility. It's got 20 MEDCO students going to it as well. Jennifer Fisher-Mueller is the head of school, turns out. So I just wanted to let you all know Leslie, Ryan Miller joined me at the end for that visit as well. I just wanted to let the committee know that that center is very open to any partnership with PSB for any of our own initiatives.
Stephen, those are students who go after extended day, right?
That's right.
Yeah, thank you. Helen?
Yeah, there was the Steps Forward meeting, Steps of Success Board meeting on January 26th. And one exciting thing is that Steps has managed to move the program down to 3rd grade, as we have too on the PSB side. And their financial situation has gotten, I mean, I think back to when I first became the representative there, and they were almost in the hole at the time and really not doing well. And over the years, with good management and donations from the public and from the town and from the state, actually some grants from the state that our representative Tommy Vitola has managed to get for Steps, they're in a more comfortable financial position. And this is the 20th anniversary year for Steps, and there'll be a celebration in the spring. It's not clear exactly what they're going to do in terms of whether it's an in-person event. That's what they'd like to do, tented and outside, but more to come. Yeah.
Thank you, Helen.
You're welcome.
Andy?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Helen, perhaps you said it and I missed it, but you talked about the expansion down to 3rd grade. So what is PSB's role in funding that expansion, if any? Or is it coming partly from us?
I think
or partly
we along, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Guillory, but I think we along with them moved up, managed our staff to be able to accommodate the 3rd graders too. And so I think the financial implication was not as great, if any, for us at this point. We do have a new, I think she came to the school committee, but I'm not sure, the new Steps coordinator for the school district and the Steps coordinator. If they haven't, we should have them come and present, actually. And Juan Cantu, who is the new Steps coordinator for Steps Inc. Anyways, they I think may have added a staff member, but I'm not sure. It's a lot of the mindset of how do we continue to move down, and the ultimate goal is to do pre-K through 12. Well, actually through college. So they right now do 3rd through graduation from college. They have a college student advisor who works with all the kids who are in continuing their education beyond high school, and helps them to, whether it's financial, whether it's mentoring, hooking them up with people, all sorts of important work for people who are, for the most part, the first in their family to go to college. So, and then the idea is to start it younger. So it began in 4th grade originally, because it was a grant that we got from the federal government that began in 4th grade. It wasn't that we decided 4th grade was where they should begin. So their strategic goal is to move down over the next few years, I think. Does that make sense, Andy?
I guess my question was more specifically just what resources exactly are we contributing to this expansion? And then for the next round, if it goes down to kindergarten, and would that become a budget item for us, or how would it happen?
So it might. I think the question is, what do you do kindergarten or pre-K through 2? Because it would be a different sort of program. They're looking at that now with somebody who's working with them to try and figure that out. it's almost like, you know, you need to work more with the parents than with the children at that point. But that's the piece that they're working on together with the PSB staff. So it's, you know, it's a joint endeavor looking at it. Linus, maybe you have more insight.
So when Dr. Cantu met with me to talk about the expansion, it was looking at the what it would take to have additional advisors for the program, as well as the additional advisors, and then the resources of the materials that would the students would engage with. And so initially there was talk about doing that this year or in the upcoming year, but I think the determination was made, let's focus on third grade, but then let's also look at how we might revamp and strengthen what's happening at the high school. And so that's where the conversation was last left off, but the desire is to grow down once that type of programming or an appropriate level of programming is developed for the K2 band or the pre-K2 band.
Anyone else? Jennifer?
And just a real quick update about our upcoming meeting, which is going to be on a Wednesday this month, February 9th at 4 p.m. At 4 p.m., the curriculum subcommittee will be meeting. We'll talk about the Office of Teaching and Learning Goals update. We'll be talking about the K-8 math curriculum and the rollout, as well as a DESE grant for social emotional learning curriculum. So everyone is welcome and invited.
Thank you, Jennifer. David?
I would just like to mention that we are going to be convening 3 listening sessions for educators next week. The first one will be on Monday, February 7th from 3:30 to 5. That will be for BEEP through grades 5. Second one will be on the 9th from 3:30 until 5. That one will cover grades 6 through 8 educators. And then the third one will be on the 10th from 3:30 to 5, and that one covers the high school grade span. Each session will have 4 school committee members present.
Robin has sent that schedule out to all of us, so be sure and check to see where you've been slotted for those meetings. Anything else? I am just going to report that I am on the police chief search committee, and we are interviewing candidates. So just thought I'd give you the update. Okay, anything else? Linus, we're not having school tomorrow, correct?
That's correct.
No school tomorrow. Okay, everyone stay safe, and
we won't call it a snow day, we'll call it an ice day, maybe.
Ice day, there you go.
How many more days do we still have until?
Have 3.
Yeah. Huh?
3 more.
3 more?
Mm-hmm.
We are not going into executive session. There is actually no need for that. So this will be the end of our meeting. So everyone, yes, Mariah?
Are you sure? I think I might have something to say.
I'm sorry, I was this would be the third closure. So we have 2 more left, Helen. I just wanted to, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know, Mariah. I don't know what it is.
I thought there was as well, Suzanne.
Me too. It was on the schedule.
On which schedule?
I could have sworn the.
Oh, we have it listed, but we don't have any, the what we have listed is not something that we have an update on. So it was about on collective bargaining, but we've just had the update. We don't have anything else to add to that. So I don't have.
At least I don't. Maybe Mariah does.
I think we should. You know, I think we can have it.
There's no harm in it if people want to do it.
Let's hear her out.
All right.
Okay.
Maybe Robin can just close this meeting to others. You know.
Why don't we just go to the other link and it'll be quick.
We have to go to the other link. We have to vote first, and I have to read the purpose. Okay, so here we go, folks. Motion to meet an executive session pursuant to Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 38, Section 21A for the following purposes. Purpose 3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the Brookline Educators Union, BEU, Unit A and Unit B, if an open meeting may have detrimental effect on the bargaining and litigating position of the public body and the chair so declares. Purpose 7, to review and approve executive session minutes from the following meeting, January 20th, 2022. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Mariah. Okay, we vote. David?
Yes.
Stephen?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
Helen?
Yes.
Val?
Yes.
Mariah?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes. Okay, we will not be coming back to open session, and we will see everyone in executive session in a few minutes. Good night to those who are leaving us.